Chapter 1236. It turned out that the defense formed by the light emitted by the platform was shaken by the huge amount of seawater, causing the infinity talismans on the platform to react and activate their power to maintain the defense. This was also because the human-shaped half-step pseudo-holy artifact had destroyed the pseudo-holy artifact and many of the talismans on the platform, causing the integrity of those talismans to be damaged. As a result, the defense activated by those talismans couldn't even withstand the crushing of the seawater. However, even though it was damaged, the power of the talismans on the platform was too strong. Although the crushing power of the seawater shook the talismans, it didn't cause any real damage to the platform. After a short while, everything calmed down and the situation inside and outside the platform returned to normal. At this moment, the Divine General's body shook and his face became slightly pale. The human-shaped half-step pseudo-holy artifact suddenly shook and a helpless expression appeared on its face. Then, it turned into a golden light and rushed towards the Divine General's body. It directly rushed into the Divine General's body as if it had never appeared before. At this moment, the Divine General took a few deep breaths and his face slowly returned to normal. Although his cultivation realm had reached the peak of the Sage-to-Be peak, he was still far from the pseudo-holy artifact. In other words, he couldn't even touch the edge of the 9th step. This caused a huge difference between him and Xian. Although there seemed to be only a slight difference in cultivation realm, there was a huge difference in essence. Such a difference caused the Divine General to be unable to perfectly activate and use the pseudo-holy artifact refined by an existence like Xian. Although he had only taken out the pseudo-holy artifact for a short period of time, he had already consumed almost all of his strength and energy. There were even signs that his life force was going to be extracted. Because of this, the Divine General was in such a sorry state after the battle. I need to adjust my breathing before I can take out this artifact again. You guys break the restriction at the entrance first. We can enter after I adjust my breathing to avoid any accidents, the Divine General said to Liao Yuan. Liao Yuan knew how the Divine General felt at this moment. He nodded and said, "That's right." After that, Immortal General sat cross-legged on the platform. He began to circulate the power in his body and his divine soul. His body naturally produced an infinite amount of Yuan Qi to make up for the terrifying loss he had suffered from using the pseudo-sage treasure. Seeing that, Liao Yuan floated up and arrived at the vortex's entrance in a short while. He looked at the vortex, not far away, quietly. At first glance, the vortex looked very ordinary. However, if one were to take a closer look, they would discover that there were countless restrictions attached to the vortex. Each of them was unimaginably complicated, and the combined power of these countless restrictive spells was enough to stop any cultivator below the pseudo-sage realm. In the face of such a restriction, an ordinary person would not be able to resist it unless they had reached the pseudo-sage level or had the strength of a pseudo-sage level. But Liao Yuan's Wuwen nunnery was too familiar with the Azure Temple. Moreover, Wuwen nunnery's cultivation system was unique, which contained many helpful mysteries. Therefore, a restriction like this wasn't impossible for Liao Yuan. She floated there. With a thought, the small talisman ball in his hand suddenly trembled, and then it spread out and transformed into a thin talisman membrane that flew forward. In the blink of an eye, it directly enveloped the vortex that was full of restrictions. As a result, the restrictions of the vortex were activated. Countless incredible attacks surged out from the vortex. They continuously bombarded the rune film. It was a pity that the rune film was clearly specially designed for such a situation. At this moment, there was an inexplicable light constantly shining on it. Countless runes constantly flowed on the rune film, constantly changing. Unexpectedly, there wasn't much damage done to it, and it completely withstood the various strange attacks from the vortex. This process looked extremely dazzling from the outside. The light and ripples that erupted from the various attacks illuminated the space within a radius of several tens of thousands of miles, making it seem as if it was another dreamy world. This process lasted for several hours. After several hours, when the Een Divine General finished adjusting his breath. His face regained its ruddy complexion, and the power in his body recovered to its peak. The rune film trembled slightly and directly turned into a huge funnel. The tip of the funnel directly inserted into the vortex, creating an entrance that could allow a person to pass normally. Obviously, the rune film had already broken the restriction that blocked the entrance of the Een Divine General and the others in the past few hours. At this moment, the restriction that covered the vortex finally revealed itself completely. It was also an endless amount of strange talismans. These talismans stirred and rotated in a frenzy. They shone intensely. With a single glance, one could tell that they were exerting an unimaginable power. They were madly squeezing the funnel formed by the talisman membrane in an attempt to shatter it. It was a pity that the shape of the funnel and the insertion point of the rune film had already reached a level where the restriction itself did not have much effect after being broken for several hours. As a result, although the impact of the restriction caused the funnel to shake continuously and deform continuously, the funnel did not shatter in the end. The funnel was still like the legendary stabilizing divine needle, deeply suppressing the vortex. "It's done, let's go." Seeing this, the Een Divine General was overjoyed. After a glance, she lightly shouted. Hearing her call, regardless of whether it was the disciples of the Een God cult or the Wuhan nunnery, they all responded in an instant. Then, they quickly flew up and turned into rays of light as they rushed towards the entrance of the funnel. In the blink of an eye, they had all rushed into the vortex. Liao, he was not slow either. After everyone rushed in, he also rushed into the vortex. After experiencing the treatment that Luo Fan had enjoyed, the Een Divine General and the others arrived in a world. This world was shrouded in the misty night. This is the Emperor Molasses. Good heavens! I knew that the Azure Temple hid a world to serve as the sect's secret realm, but I didn't expect this world to be so magical. It actually formed the Emperor Molasses naturally. After arriving here, the Een Divine General instantly discovered the uniqueness of this world and could not help but exclaim, "The most important thing now is to find Xian, nothing else." At this time, Liao Yi also appeared in this world. He looked around and did not find Xian, so he said so. "That's right. What you said makes sense." The Een Divine General came back to his senses and nodded. Then, he unreservedly spread his perception in all directions. Not long after, a strange light flashed in his eyes. Everything in this world was completely covered by his senses, and it was brought into his mind and will. As a peak existence of the sage-to-be, although he did not find the traces of the ninth step, the Een Divine General was already extremely powerful. It was not difficult for him to cover such a world with his perception. How could there be nothing? The Een Divine General frowned. Although the disciples of the Een God sect looked magnificent when they fought, like the golden-armored deities, people thought that the Een God sect paid more attention to the body and was not good at perception. In fact, it was the opposite. The Een God sect, what they cultivated was the godly soul, which was their own will. The image of the golden-armored deities that they displayed when fighting against the enemy was just the manifestation of their will and their godly soul. Therefore, the Een Divine General, who occupied the position of an elder in the Een God sect, had a perception ability that was closely related to the godly soul. Naturally, it was much stronger than the average cultivators at the same level. With such a powerful perception, he was confident that he would not miss any space that he had sensed after covering the whole world with his perception. However, under such circumstances, he did not find the existence of Xian at all, nor did he find any clues about Xian's existence. No, how is that possible? They came here to upgrade the magic treasure of the half-step pseudo-sage level to the pseudo-sage level. It's impossible for them to hide without doing anything. How can we not find any traces of them? Liao Yuan frowned. But in fact, there's no trace of them. Not only in this world, but also in the many affiliated spaces and affiliated small worlds in this world. There is no trace of their existence at all. The Een Divine General said with a rather ugly expression. It was no wonder that he had paid such a huge price. He did not even hesitate to fall out with the alliance that had been allied for trillions of years and finally came here. When he arrived at this destination, he found that there was nothing he was looking for. This kind of feeling, of course, would not make him feel good. Could it be that this is a trap set by Xian? Liao Yuan murmured. At this time, she was quite vigilant. Like the Yin Divine General, she had also sensed this world, but she also did not sense any traces of Xian's existence. Originally, she thought that her perception method was not good enough, so she missed some traces. However, at this time, hearing the Yin Divine General say so, she could not help but start to suspect that Xian was really not in this world. Impossible. This secret realm is very important to the Azure Temple. They would never use this secret realm as a bait to trick us. The Yin Divine General said firmly. A very important secret realm? Compared to becoming a false sage, what is more important? Liao Yuan said faintly. Since we can't be sure, then let's just destroy this world. If they are here, I don't believe that they can still hide like this. If they're not here, then we can also save some time. The Yin Divine General frowned and thought for a while, then suddenly sneered. Destroying a part of the world was not a big deal for those who had reached the peak of the quasi-sage realm. Even if there were no external tools or external forces, the Yin Divine General and the others were confident that they could completely destroy this part of the world. What's more, at this moment, they had an extremely powerful half-step pseudo-sage treasure that even an Yin Immortal General could only use for a short while. It was because of this power that the Yin Divine General had the confidence to say that he wanted to completely destroy this world. Liao Yuan thought for a while and said, "This is a good idea. I agree to destroy this part of the world." Although some of the others could not bear to see this happen, they did not say anything in the end. At this moment, Xian was already hiding at the place where the will of heaven and earth was at where Luo Fan was. When his incarnation was destroyed, his body and mind were both injured, and his strength was greatly affected. With his current strength, if he did not use any magic treasure to fight against the half-step pseudo-sage treasure, he would really be tired of living. Although he had the Azure Temple, a half-step pseudo-sage treasure, at this moment, he wanted to refine this magic treasure into a true pseudo-sage treasure. How would he dare to take out this magic treasure to fight against another half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure? If any damage was caused, wouldn't the Yin God cult and Wu Wen'in's plan succeed? Because of this, when the Yin Divine General and the others were breaking the entrance, he quickly hid in this abstract place through the traces he left behind. Of course, although he had already hidden here, it did not mean that he did not know what was happening there. After all, this was the Azure secret realm of the Azure Temple. Even if they could not be as omnipotent as Luo Fan, they still had some privileges that other cultivators did not have. These privileges were not enough for him to defeat a half-step pseudo-sage treasure in his current state. But it was not a problem for him to stay here and watch what was happening in the Azure secret realm. The moment the Yin Divine General said that he wanted to destroy the Azure secret realm, Xian's expression changed. How ruthless! What the Azure Temple needed was the will of heaven and earth. If this world was destroyed, how could the will of heaven and earth still exist? It could be said that although the Yin Divine General's suggestion was to vent his displeasure, it was unexpectedly effective. Xian could not continue hiding. Xian sighed and looked at Luo Fan, who was standing quietly above the will of heaven and earth. He knew that the process of extracting the will of heaven and earth would not end in a short period of time. He could only sigh helplessly. With a slight thought, he left this place and appeared in the Azure secret realm. He did not appear opposite the Yin Divine General and the others. Instead, he appeared behind the Yin Divine General. The golden energy in his body suddenly surged out and turned into a sharp awl. He stabbed the back of the Yin Divine General's head. The gap between a Yin Immortal General and a Xian had been mentioned before. Even though he had been vigilant, he couldn't respond to it at all. In a split second, the golden awl directly stabbed into the back of his head. In an instant, a loud noise that sounded like the destruction of a universe and the shattering of heaven and earth could be heard. An extremely strong vibration spread in all directions from the point of contact between the All and the Een Divine General's head. Although the Een Divine General's body was strong and terrifying, it could not compare to the golden energy released by Xian. Under the impact, the head suddenly exploded. There was no blood or gray matter at all. In the blink of an eye, countless tiny specks of light splattered in all directions and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Xian, who had succeeded in one move, had an extremely ugly expression, because he could feel that although the Een Divine General's head had disappeared, his soul was not in his body. The damage to his body looked terrible, but it did not affect his life at all. In other words, at this moment, the Een Divine General was still alive. Moreover, he was nowhere to be found. It was even more dangerous for him to be alive. You really couldn't hold it in any longer. At this moment, a voice came from the Een Divine General's body. Then, a feeling of time and space, rules and laws being frozen appeared again. This time, the area affected the entire heaven and earth. Although the heavenly green mystery realm was mysterious, it was still not as good as the demon realm. Be it the stability of time, space, rules, and laws, everything was unimaginably different from the demon realm. Because of such a huge difference, the power that could only affect a certain area previously had completely enveloped the entire heaven and earth here. It affected the entire heavenly green mystery realm, causing everything in the secret realm to seem to be frozen in an instant. He actually hit a clone in the magic treasure. The Een God cult leader really lives up to his name. His scheming is really brilliant. Xian's body trembled, and a sky-green light enveloped his entire body. The powerful power that froze the entire secret realm was instantly isolated, no longer having any effect on him. A golden-armored deity stepped out from the Een Divine General's broken body. It was none other than the half-stepped pseudo-sage treasure that had appeared once before. However, at this moment, the face of the humanoid magic treasure had changed a little. It looked more like the cult leader of the Een God cult, which was the golden-armored deity that had appeared twice in the gambling fight. After the golden-armored deity appeared, he waved his hand, and Liao Yuan and the others returned to normal. Clearly, he had retracted the power that had frozen everything on Liao Yuan and the others. How can you compare to the heavenly green sect leader? If it wasn't for our quick reaction, we might still be in the dark. We would only know that we've been fooled when you become a pseudo-sage and come to suppress us. The golden-armored deity said calmly. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. T. Chapter 1237. Hearing this, Xianwen's expression turned even uglier. There was no right or wrong in this matter. Xianwen wanted to complete the goal that the Azure Temple had been pursuing for hundreds of millions of years. He wanted to refine the Azure Temple into a true pseudo-saint treasure and raise his own cultivation realm to the level of a pseudo-saint. This was a matter of course, and no one could blame him for it. Similarly, the two sects, the Een God cult and the Wuan nunnery, did not make any mistakes. After all, if the Azure Temple were to suddenly raise the half-step pseudo-sage treasure to the pseudo-sage level, the strength of the Azure Temple would increase by at least 10,000 times. Such an upgrade would definitely break the stable balance that the three sects had established for a long time. The Temple of Azure's position would directly surpass the other two sects and cause the other two sects to directly become the vassals of the Temple of Azure. Obviously, this was something that the two sects would never agree to. The reason for these two completely different attitudes was because they stood in different positions, and the focus of their interest had diverged. However, there was no such thing as right or wrong, nor was there any distinction between good and bad. It seems that some conflicts can't be reconciled. Xianwen gritted his teeth and spat out such a sentence. The golden-armored deity said calmly, "If you don't compromise, naturally, it's impossible to reconcile. If you're willing to compromise, our three sects will still be united as one." Ha ha ha! Xianwen suddenly laughed out loud. You must have heard clearly what I said to Een Immortal General just now. Since you heard it clearly, Why are you still saying such naive words here? Do you think I'm a fool? Xianwen said coldly. Do you think you still have a chance to turn the tables now? The golden-armored deity gestured to the surroundings and said to Xianwen. Xianwen looked around and saw that Yi Tian and the others were looking at him with strange gazes. There was no hatred in their gazes, only regret and pity. Looking at them, Xianwen knew in his heart. He had lost the possibility of not causing unnecessary trouble. At this moment, no matter how unwilling he was, he had no choice but to summon the Azure Temple in order to delay the time until Luo Fan extracted the world will of this world. Thinking of this, he could only sigh. His body trembled, and an extremely simple-looking temple slowly emerged from the top of his head. Not long after, it had already transformed into a huge azure temple above Xianwen's head. It was the half-step pseudo-sage artifact, the Azure Temple. It was also the core of all the disputes and transactions this time. As soon as the Azure Sky Temple appeared, its natural aura enveloped the entire area. The entire space-time and the power released by the humanoid magic treasure that froze space-time and froze the nomological law layer offset each other, causing the entire Azure Mystery Realm to instantly return to its original state. The fallen leaves that had been frozen in the void, the Emperor Essence that had fallen from the sky, and the fruits that were leaving the fruit tree. The Yuan Qi that had already solidified, circulated, and everything returned to its original state in an instant. Is this your answer? The golden-armored deity seemed to sigh regretfully. At this moment, there was a sudden rush in the sky green temple. Green light constantly spewed out and formed hundreds of figures in the void. Among these figures, any one of them was equivalent to a level. One pseudo-sage who had set foot on the first step. Their strength, compared to any of the cultivators present, including Xianwen himself and the invisible sect leader inside the golden-armored deity, they were all one level stronger. With hundreds of such powerful existences appearing at once, the aura they emitted was enough to shake the entire world. The entire space-time changed completely, causing the Azure Mystery Realm to be shrouded in countless strange lights and shadows. It was as if the world had completely changed at this moment, and everyone present had appeared in another space-time. These hundreds of people were holding various kinds of magic treasures. After the figures with weapons appeared, they charged at everyone present except for Xianwen, intending to kill everyone present. After all, even the strongest amongst the people present here was slightly inferior to Xianwen. If they didn't possess any other ability to resist, then the strength revealed by any one of these green figures was sufficient to annihilate all the living beings here and transform them into powder and nothingness. This was the difference between the pseudo-sage level and the sage-to-be level. Just as the hundreds of green figures were about to drown everyone present, the golden-armored deity grabbed with both hands, causing space-time to tremble. The nomological law layer instantly seemed to exist outside of normal space-time, directly turning into a huge silk net above everyone's heads. This huge silk net seemed to blot out the sky and cover the earth. It was like the legendary inescapable net, tightly wrapping everyone in the area. Faced with such a tight and vast silk net, the hundreds of green figures activated all kinds of weapons and magic treasures in their hands, unleashing all kinds of magic skills, and attacked the silk net in a frenzy. The effect of this attack was truly earth-shattering. The entire Azure Mystery Realm shook violently under this attack, and it even vaguely felt like the entire Secret Realm was about to collapse at this moment. However, such an attack only made the silk net tremble. The grid on it constantly twisted, enlarged, shrank, enlarged, and shrank for a long time. In the end, there were no changes at all, and it remained firmly above everyone's heads, completely shielding them from the attacks of the hundreds of pseudo-sage green figures. At this moment, the golden-armored deity smiled faintly and said, "Have you forgotten that this magic treasure that I'm attached to is also a pseudo-sage magic treasure? Your magic treasure has a special power. Do you think mine doesn't have it?" With a smile, he raised his hand and grabbed. The net that had just appeared and blotted out the sky, and Earth instantly left its original position. Then, the net pounced towards the hundreds of green figures. The golden-armored immortal was a human-shaped half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure. Even an immortal general would have to consume a lot of energy to refine such a magic treasure. In fact, he could only use this magic treasure for a few breaths of time. Once he exceeded the time limit, he might harm his own foundation. However, this did not mean that one needed terrifying power to use this magic treasure. The reason why an immortal general would have to pay such a huge price was because of this. The fundamental reason was that his cultivation level was not enough to move this magic treasure, so he could only forcefully use his own power to move it. This was why refining this magic treasure had such a shocking consumption. In reality, if one's cultivation realm was high enough, one wouldn't need to waste much energy to activate such a magical treasure. Just guiding the power of this magic treasure itself was already self-sufficient. This allowed this magic treasure to be able to use its power for a long time. It was precisely because this half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure had such a special characteristic that the god cult leader only needed a small clone to be able to use such a magic treasure freely. He could even easily protect everyone present. At this moment, the immortal general's soul had already been absorbed into the magic treasure. However, it was unknown if he was hiding, or if he was looking for a way to recover his head and broken body that had been smashed by Wen just now. Wen's expression became extremely ugly as he faced the golden-armored immortal general using the laws of the Azure Mystery Realm to counterattack him. Such an attack was actually not too powerful. At least, it was so for the half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure, Azure Temple. With the power of the Azure Temple, it would not be too difficult to completely break this attack. It was not difficult at all. All he needed to do was slightly gather the power of the Azure Temple and crash into it. Then, he would naturally be able to shatter the net. However, Wen did not dare to do so. This was because the combination of this silk net was the laws of the Azure Mystery Realm. If Wen completely destroyed this silk net, then to the Azure Mystery Realm, it was equivalent to a ruthless slash on his body. The damage caused would be shockingly great. It might even affect the process of Luo Fan extracting the heaven and earth will of the Azure Mystery Realm at this moment. With such a serious matter at stake, how could Wen dare to attack this silk net without any scruples? Other than secretly cursing the god cult leader for being despicable, he could only control the Azure Temple to dodge the attack of the silk net and look for the flaws revealed by the god cult leader. He wanted to bypass the silk net and directly attack the god cult leader's clone to prevent the Azure Mystery Realm from suffering unbearable damage in the process. How rich was the god cult leader's battle experience? Wen could quickly tell how much he cared about the destruction of the Azure Mystery Realm. He could not help but reveal an inexplicable smile on his face. As soon as he saw this smile, Wen, who was controlling the Azure Temple to dodge and only occasionally counterattack, suddenly realized something was wrong. Just as he was about to make a move, he almost shouted out loud. This was because the golden-armored deity, who was also the pseudo-sage treasure possessed by the god cult master, was grabbing at the net in the air with one hand, trying to trap the hundreds of powerful green figures. At the same time, his other hand slapped down at the void. This slap directly went deep into the depths of space-time, directly exploding with unparalleled power, causing a black hole of nothingness to appear at the place where he slapped. In that place, the balance of time and space, the balance of vitality, and the stability of the laws of the Azure Mystery Realm were instantly broken. Moreover, this kind of destruction was spreading rapidly into the distance. It looked as if the entire sky-green mystery realm was slowly collapsing from the spot where he had clapped his hand. Stop! Wen finally could not hold it in and shouted. You're joking, right? This method seems to be very effective. Why should I stop? The golden-armored deity smiled faintly. At this moment, Liao Yuan and the others also had smiles on their faces. Although it seemed that the Azure Mystery Realm was heading towards destruction, The changes of the destruction did not affect where they were standing. It was as if there was an invisible barrier protecting them from the slightest damage. Luo Fan finally sighed when he saw this from the abstract place. When the golden armored deity began to destroy the heaven and earth, the will of heaven and earth under his feet shook slightly, and a faint aura began to emit from the will of heaven and earth. Of course, this kind of faint aura was extremely abstract and was not an aura that ordinary living beings could understand. When this aura was emitted, Luo Fan knew that the destruction of the heaven and earth had also affected the will of heaven and earth. What a pity! I wanted to continue watching, but it seems impossible now. Luo Fan sighed. If an ordinary will was weakened like this, naturally, there would be such an intense reaction to completely erase the cause of its weakening. However, the will of heaven and earth's way of thinking was not something ordinary living beings could understand. Therefore, at this moment, although there was a powerful existence in the heaven and earth destroying the heaven and earth, it was destroying the foundation of the will of heaven and earth. But the will of heaven and earth acted as if nothing had happened. It allowed the golden armored deity to destroy the heaven and earth without any reaction. It felt as if nothing had happened. Luo Fan grabbed with his hand, and in an instant, the entire will of heaven and earth shook slightly. Countless fragments separated from the will of heaven and earth. Little by little, they condensed into a torrent that rushed up from the will of the world below. They quickly condensed and compressed above his right hand, gradually turning into a crystal that grew bigger and bigger, more and more translucent. As the fragments separated, the huge will of heaven and earth, the indescribable will of heaven and earth began to gradually shrink, and a faint aura was emitted from it. At the same time, in a normal space-time, which was in the normal green sky secret realm outside of this abstract location, the entire heaven and earth underwent some extremely subtle changes. The emperor essence that was originally permeating the heaven and earth gradually evaporated, and the fragments of will contained within it gradually disappeared into thin air. On the entire land, in the boundless ocean, the mountains and rivers, the flowers, trees, and so on, everything was gradually changing. The various inexplicable charms that originally contained were gradually fading. Everything in the world contained a type of charm. This kind of charm did not exist for ordinary people. Only those existences like artists who had raised their mental state to a certain level could feel this charm. They used their own methods to express this charm and became various kinds of art. This charm was not the will of heaven and earth. It was closely related to the will of heaven and earth. It could be said that it was the embodiment of the will of heaven and earth. If at some point the will of heaven and earth disappeared, then this charm would also disappear. At this moment, what was happening in the green sky secret realm was the external manifestation of the will of heaven and earth disappearing. That's right. What Luo Fan was doing now was extracting the will of heaven and earth from this part of the world. He was extracting the will of heaven and earth from this part of the world, and once again condensed it into a pure crystal on his right hand. The reason why he was able to do this so easily, with just a simple grab, had already completed the process of extracting the will of heaven and earth, which many cultivators of the Azure Temple had spent hundreds of millions of years to complete. The fundamental reason was very simple. At this moment, Luo Fan was like a saint in this world, omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient. With such omnipotence, how could it be difficult for him to extract the will of heaven and earth? Xianwen was extremely familiar with the green sky secret realm. The moment the green sky secret realm changed, he understood in his heart, this is the will of heaven and earth has already been extracted. After understanding this, Xianwen could not help but be overjoyed. Although he knew that Luo Fan might have a way to extract the will of heaven and earth, he never thought that Luo Fan's speed would be so fast. In less than a night, he had already found a way to extract the will of heaven and earth. This was like a cardiac stimulant injected directly into his heart. It instantly gave him a huge boost in confidence, and he could not help but smile uncontrollably on his face. It was the first time the God cult leader came to the Green Sky Secret Realm. He was extremely unfamiliar with everything in the Green Sky Secret Realm, but he did not notice anything wrong the moment the heaven and earth changed. He was just secretly wondering why the destruction of the heaven and earth had become so much easier. Suddenly, he saw the uncontrollable smile on Xuanwen's face, and his expression changed drastically. Damn it, how could it be so fast? His thinking speed was so fast that in an instant, countless thoughts had already crossed his mind. In the blink of an eye, he had already roughly guessed what had happened. He could not help but curse in his heart. At this moment, he casually wrapped up the silk net from the ground to the sky, forming an indomitable barrier that separated him from Xianwen. After separating them, he quickly instructed Liao Yuan and the others, "There's not enough time. Quickly destroy this heaven and earth as fast as possible." Hearing the God cult leader's urgent words, Liao Yuan and the others' expressions changed drastically. They did not have time to ask anything, and each of them activated their Dharma treasures. Endless violent power erupted and blasted towards the void of the Green Sky Secret Realm. They blasted towards a natural law layer that the Green Sky Secret Realm had just replenished. Chapter 1238. When the entire Sky Green Secret Realm turned green, the entire world gradually collapsed. The gradual process of destruction paused for a moment before it completely stopped. No matter how the golden-armored deity, Liao Yuan, and the rest continued to pour all kinds of powerful attacks on the space-time, they could no longer allow the world to continue towards destruction and extinction. However, every time there was an attack on the world, the half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure floating above Xianwen's head would start to vibrate continuously according to the frequency. It was as if the attacks on the heaven and earth and the laws of nature were not attacking the heaven and earth and the laws of nature, but were attacking the Azure Sky Temple. To everyone present, how could they not be clear about such a phenomenon? It was obvious that Xianwen had directly transferred the pressure of the entire world to the Azure Temple. He had made the Azure Temple endure the attacks of the entire world. Compared to a half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure, a world was certainly much more powerful. If that was not the case, Xianwen would not have needed to use the will of the world to upgrade the half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure to the true pseudo-sage grade. However, this did not mean that the ability of the world to withstand attacks would be stronger than that of a half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure. In fact, because the world was too vast, the power and defense of the entire world were scattered to all parts of the world. On the other hand, a half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure condensed a small portion of its own power. Under such circumstances, although the defense of a half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure was much weaker than the entire world, if it was scattered to different parts, the defense of a half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure was stronger than the world. At this moment, when the attacks that were powerful enough to destroy heaven and earth were transferred to the half-step pseudo-sage Azure Temple, the Azure Temple continued to shake violently. However, in the end, it did not suffer any real damage. Seeing this, the golden-armored deity's expression became rather ugly. He clenched his fists and punched the void crazily. The power of each punch had crossed the boundary of the quasi-sage grade. He had truly entered the pseudo-saint realm. Under normal circumstances, any one of such violent fists would be enough to completely destroy the entire Green Sky Mystery Realm. It caused irreparable damage to a certain part of the Azure Sky Secret Realm. It spread out directly. In the end, it caused the destruction of the world. But at this moment, with so many fists bombarding the void, it only caused the Azure Temple to slightly tremble. It was just a few tremors. In the end, there were no other obvious consequences. While Xianwen was trying his best to resist the destruction of the world, the extremely strange and mysterious changes in the Sky Green Mystery Realm continued. The various charms that were contained in everything between the heavens and the earth were constantly disappearing and disappearing. The entire world, which originally looked very beautiful and magical, gradually became lifeless and dull. And in that abstract place, Luo Fan stood on the world's will, still rapidly extracting the world's will from below. He turned the world's will into fragments, and once again condensed them on his palm, condensing them into a strange crystal. The torrent of will fragments that had spread out from the world's will had become even larger than before. The fragments had become denser than before, and every fragment had become even larger than before. The dim aura emitted by the will of heaven and earth was dozens of times stronger than it was at the beginning. Luo Fan was almost omnipotent in the azure sky secret realm. The speed at which he extracted the world's will was, of course, faster and easier than anyone could imagine. Although only a short period of time had passed, the amount of the world's will that was extracted had already reached 1% of the entire world's will. Although it was only 1%, if this 1% of the world's was transformed into the will of a normal living being, perhaps even the will of a level 9 pseudo, Saint would not be able to compare to it. After consuming this 1% of the world's will, the entire Azure Sky Secret Realm did not feel like it was only 1%, but it felt like it was not even half of what it was originally. No matter what, whether it was the feeling of vitality, the feeling of matter, or even the feeling of space-time, the feeling of the rules and laws here, it felt like it was not even half of what it was originally. Such an obvious change made the golden-armored deity and the others even more anxious. At this moment, the golden-armored deity shouted coldly, "What are you waiting for? How long are you going to wait?" Hearing this cold shout, a cold voice suddenly came from Liao Yuan's body. "I originally thought that with your means, you should be able to do it. I didn't expect that in the end. You still have to make me do it. How disappointing." After this voice, a mysterious existence that seemed to be constantly changing, as if it contained all the forms of everything in the universe, but also did not seem to be anything in the universe, suddenly rushed out of Liao Yuan's body and condensed into a strange magic treasure in front of everyone. This was yet another half-step, pseudo-sage magical treasure. This was natural. The Azure Temple, the Yin God Cult, and the Wuwen Nunnery were able to form such a stable balance previously, so their strengths were naturally similar. The Azure Temple and the Yin God Cult both had half-step pseudo-sage magic waves, so how could the Wuwen Nunnery lack such a magic treasure? The cultivation of the Wuwen Nunnery was extremely strange, but this half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure was extremely strange and unpredictable, which was amazing. As the void distorted slightly, it had already turned into the figure of a beautiful woman. At first glance, this woman's figure looked similar to the figure of the abbess of the Wuwen Nunnery, who had appeared at the scene of the bet. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that this woman's figure was actually still indescribable. It was still unpredictable, as if it still contained everything in the universe. It was also as if it was nothing at all. Oomph. The golden-armored deity snorted coldly, but did not say anything else. At this time, it was not the time to talk too much. Right now, the most important thing was to stop what was happening in the Azure Mystery Realm. When Xianwen saw this change, a faint sneer appeared on his face, and he said, "If this doppelganger of yours had come out at the beginning, it might have been a threat to me. Now that you've come out, it's really too late." Hearing Xuanwen's words, the half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure of the Wuwen Nunnery smiled. She raised her hand and slapped the void. A wave of power directly passed through the barrier of the Azure Temple and directly affected the Azure Mystery Realm, causing the entire Azure Mystery Realm to shake violently. The violent turbulence instantly spread in all directions from the place where she slapped. This time, what spread out was not destruction. It was change. A change that went from the inside to the outside, from the deepest part to the surface of space-time. Amidst this change, the space-time of the Azure Mystery Realm and the Rule of Law layer gradually became chaotic. Gradually, they merged and turned into an extremely strange form. It seemed as if everything existed, but at the same time, it seemed as if it was nothing at all. Such a characteristic was almost the same as the half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure of the Wuwen Nunnery. It was obvious that it had been assimilated by the half-stepped pseudo-sage magic treasure. Seeing this, Xuanwen's expression changed slightly, but he did not do nothing. He raised his hand and pointed at the half-stepped pseudo-sage magic treasure of the Azure Temple above his head. An endless amount of green light suddenly rushed out from the Azure Sky Temple. This green light quickly rushed out and suddenly drilled into the void. As the green light merged into the void, the green light above the entire Azure Mystery realm gradually brightened. Strange waves began to appear from all over the world and quickly gathered at the half-stepped pseudo-sage magic treasure of the Wuwen Nunnery. It crazily suppressed the space-time that was being assimilated. Although the assimilation did not immediately recover, it could not continue to deepen and expand. At this moment, the golden-armored deity made his move at the same time. He clenched his fists and spread his legs apart in a horse stance. Then, he raised his right foot and stomped down. Although this stomp was on the void, it seemed as if he was stepping on the core of the entire space-time. In an instant, there was a shocking thunderclap, causing the entire world to shake slightly. At the same time, the Azure Temple above Xuanwen's head shook even more violently. It looked as if there was a huge hand holding the Azure Temple and shaking it violently like a dice. Xuanwen's expression changed even more when he sensed this change. He raised his hand to hold the Azure Temple and poured the power in his body into it without reservation, trying his best to stabilize the Azure Temple. At this moment, the golden-armored deity made his move again. He punched out with both of his fists. In an instant, a powerful shockwave erupted from between his hands. If such a powerful punch was thrown in an ordinary space-time or in an ordinary universe, it would be enough to turn the world and the universe into a paste. Even with the Azure Temple guiding the power and attack, it was difficult for it to withstand such a terrifying attack without suffering any damage. At the instant the two fists were thrown out, a strange cracking sound came from the Azure Temple. Then, the green light that covered the entire world dimmed slightly. The assimilated space-time around Wuwen's pseudo-sage treasure instantly broke through the barrier of the Azure Temple and began to spread out unhurriedly. A look of regret and anger appeared on Xuanwen's face. The regret was obviously directed at the Azure Temple, and the anger was directed at the God Cult Master and the Wuwen's Temple Master. The cracking sound came from inside the Azure Temple, which meant that the main body of the Azure Temple had already suffered considerable damage. At this moment, although it did not drop from the pseudo-sage level directly, its power had been weakened. If that was not the case, Wuwen's pseudo-sage treasure would not have been able to break through the barrier of the Azure Temple, and the assimilation would continue to spread out. However, at this moment, Xuanwen could only rely on the Azure Sky Temple. Although the Azure Temple was a half-step pseudo-sage artifact, the power it unleashed was much stronger than Xuanwen himself. Similarly, the golden-armored deity and the beautiful woman were also pseudo-sage treasures, and the power they could exert was also stronger than Xuanwen's. Under such circumstances, if Xuanwen wanted to protect the Azure Sky Mystery Realm and drag it out until Luo Fan extracted all of the world's will and completed the crucial step of turning the Azure Sky Temple into a true pseudo-divine treasure, he could only rely on the Azure Sky Temple. Even if this would damage the Azure Temple, even if it would cause the Azure Temple to drop in cultivation level, he had no other choice. At this moment, the golden-armored deity and Wuwen's pseudo-sage treasure, which was also the beautiful woman, revealed a faint look of joy on their faces. Even if they could not destroy this world, as long as they could damage the Azure Temple, they would have achieved their goal. One must know that refining a treasure from the pinnacle of the pseudo-sage level to the pseudo-sage level was not something that could be done in a short period of time. That would take at least 100,000 years, or even 1,000,000 years to achieve. Hence, as long as the Azure Temple was defeated from the pseudo-sage level, even if Xuanwen obtained what he needed from this world this time, he would not be able to do so. It would be impossible for him to refine the Azure Temple to the pseudo-sage level so quickly. This way, the three sects would be in a state of balance again. In that case, even if the Azure Temple wanted to fall out with them because of what they had done this time, they would not have enough power to do so. They would not have enough power to deal with the power of the Een God Society and Wuonen, and so on. The crisis this time, it was naturally resolved. Hence, at this moment, the two of them continued to attack without hesitation. Their attacks were directly transmitted to the Azure Temple in the void, causing it to shake more and more violently. Even Xianwen, who was supporting the Azure Temple with his hands, turned pale. Blood continuously seeped out of his 7 orifices and turned into a powerful qi and blood creature in the void. After the transformation was successful, it was shaken by the power contained in the qi and blood, causing it to collapse once again. His body completely turned into nothingness and disappeared without a trace. Such a tragic scene really sent chills down one's spine. Above the Azure Temple, there were cracking sounds coming from all the time. The sounds were extremely dense, and it sounded like firecrackers were being set off inside the Azure Temple. With every sound, the green light that shrouded the entire world dimmed a little, and the space assimilated by the half-step pseudo-saint treasure of Wu when it expanded a little. This went on for several hours. At this moment, more than half of the area in the Azure Secret Realm had been completely assimilated into a strange state that seemed to be everything, but also seemed to be nothing at the same time. After such a long time, although the power of the Azure Temple was continuously weakening, it did not fall to the pseudo-sage level at all. Instead, it still stubbornly maintained its essence of the pseudo-sage level. After a pseudo-holy treasure was reduced to a lower level, it would take hundreds of thousands of years or even millions of years to raise it back to the pseudo-holy level. This was enough to show how much damage a pseudo-holy treasure would cause to a pseudo-holy treasure. Extrapolating from this fact, one could see how difficult it was to accumulate that kind of damage. Therefore, the Azure Sky Temple had been destroyed for several hours at a time. However, it had not been damaged to the point where its level had not dropped because of this. However, just because it did not happen now did not mean that it would not happen in the future. At this moment, Xianwen and Azure Temple could only passively endure the attacks. Even if they did not receive much damage from each attack, as the damage accumulated, there would definitely be a moment when the damage accumulated to the limit, resulting in a qualitative change that would directly cause Azure Temple to fall to a lower level. Moreover, looking at Xuanwen's cracked body, which was bleeding continuously, and his expression was extremely tragic and hideous, it seemed that he was not far from the time when the Azure Temple was reduced to a lower level. I must hold on. Perhaps in the next moment, fellow Taoist Luo Fan will complete the extraction of the will of the heavens and earth. This thought was the most stubborn obsession that existed in Xianwen's mind at this moment, or rather, his conviction. What supported this thought of his was the change that he could feel in the entire Azure Mystery Realm. That kind of charm was disappearing, that kind of world was becoming uglier and duller. And that kind of state made him realize that Luo Fan was still constantly extracting the will of the world from this world, and was still carrying out the plan he had discussed with him before. Right now, Xianwen's body was in a complete mess. Be it his physical body, power, or even his soul, they were all in a mess. The attacks were continuously transmitted into his body through the Azure Temple, shaking him up incessantly. As a result, the power he had created out of thin air was unable to keep up with the consumption. He was unable to even recover from the damage he had suffered. All he could do was provide as much power as he could to the Azure Temple to repair his internal injuries. Why are you still holding on? At most, in a few more minutes, the Azure Temple will be reduced to a lower level. At that time, no matter what plan you have, it will not succeed. Instead, it will weaken your strength to a point where you can't bear to look at it. Do you really want to see that happen? The golden-armored deity said as he attacked. So there's still a few more minutes. If I had known earlier, I would have slowed down a little. At this moment, a clear voice rang out from the void and entered the ears of everyone present. Hearing this voice, everyone's expression changed drastically. Chapter 1239. The person who spoke was none other than Luo Fan. Obviously, after a few hours, Luo Fan had completely extracted the will of the sky green mystery realm from that abstract location, fulfilling the conditions he had agreed upon with Xianwen. At that moment, Xuanwen's mind moved. The green light that had covered the entire green sky mystery realm and the entire space-time instantly dissipated. In the blink of an eye, it had returned to the green sky temple, as if it had never appeared before. Originally, it was the existence of the green light that prevented the destruction of the sky green mystery realm. At that moment, although Yuan and the others had stopped their attacks on the sky green mystery realm, after losing the green light, the aftermath of the previous attacks had almost caused the entire sky green mystery realm to fall apart. Not only did the master of Wuhan Monastery's body corrode and assimilate the entire space-time, but the Yin God cult master's attack also caused the same serious consequences. The entire space-time's layer of laws and laws collapsed in an instant. It was like a porcelain bottle that had been hit by a power that exceeded its limit. Suddenly, it was filled with endless cracks that looked even denser than a spider's web. However, this change did not last long. A palm with slightly yellow skin that did not look very smooth emerged from the void. However, it naturally contained an extraordinary charm, as if it was explaining all sorts of extremely profound cultivation principles and strange things. The palm pressed down on the void, and in an instant, everything calmed down. The entire sky green mystery realm, which was originally on the verge of collapse, instantly stopped collapsing. Then, it was as if time had flowed backward and the entire sky green mystery realm began to gradually recover. The collapsed areas were reformed and the destroyed areas were revealed again. In the blink of an eye, the entire sky green mystery realm had completely returned to its normal state. It was as if nothing had happened. Only Xianwen, who was holding the sky green temple with an extremely weak aura but an extremely happy expression, and the Yin God cult master, the master of Wuhan Monastery, and the others who were staring at the changes in the sky green mystery realm with their mouths agape. After all these changes stopped, the void shook, and from the position where the palm had come out, a figure seemed to have come out of nothingness. He slowly appeared in front of everyone. This person's appearance could only barely be described as handsome. He wore a long robe and did not exude any extraordinary aura. He looked like an ordinary person who would appear on the most ordinary street in any country. Of course, such a feeling. It also let everyone know just how powerful and unbelievable this person was. After all, this was the Azure Sky Mystery Realm, and what this person did just now was to raise his hand and gently wave his hand to completely repair the entire world. Such an unbelievable feat. How could this person really be as ordinary as he looked on the surface? At this moment, he looked like an ordinary person, so there was only one possibility. That was this person was stronger than all of them, so much so that they couldn't even detect him. This person, of course, could not be anyone else. It was Luo Fan. At this moment, he was holding a sparkling and translucent crystal in his left hand. He extended his right hand forward, maintaining the last posture he had when he restored the entire world. He looked rather carefree. Although the will of heaven and earth had been completely extracted, this was still Luo Fan's authority in this world. In other words, the fact that he was omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient in this world did not affect him much. Restoring the entire world just now was just a form of using the power of heaven and earth. It did not consume much of his strength at all, and to him, it was naturally something that could be done with just a thought. It seemed unbelievable, but in reality, it was just like that. It was not as unbelievable as it seemed. However, Luo Fan obviously did not need to explain this to everyone. He only smiled slightly. He looked down at everyone. At this moment, Xianwen mumbled, "Is it this thing? After waiting for hundreds of billions of years, I never thought that I would finally get it." At this moment, there was nothing else in his eyes other than the crystal in Luo Fan's left hand. At first glance, the crystal seemed very ordinary and did not give off any special aura at all. However, upon closer inspection, one would feel that the crystal was many times larger than it seemed on the surface. When one looked at it, one would feel as if one's will was being suppressed. It was as if the slightest change in the crystal was enough to completely erase one's will and existence. To Xianwen, a crystal like this could not be any more obvious. This was clearly the feeling that the will of heaven and earth gave him. This is it. Luo Fan only smiled and waved his hand. The football-sized crystal in his hand that was condensed from the will of heaven and earth instantly made no sound. It directly arrived in front of Xianwen in a way that surpassed the limits of everyone's senses. Xianwen did not feel any trace of the will of heaven and earth flying over. With a flash of his eyes, he realized that the will of heaven and earth that he had been dreaming of had already arrived in front of him. He could not react for a moment. Fortunately, compared to the others, the will of heaven and earth had arrived in front of him after all. In the end, he was the first to react before anyone else could. With a slight thought, the half-step pseudo-sage treasure above his head, the blue sky temple, shook slightly and suddenly sank down. It directly swallowed the football-sized crystal that was condensed from the will of heaven and earth. Such a decisive decision made the Yin God cult master and the others smile bitterly. Before the idea of snatching this unknown existence had even fully settled in their heads, they had already completely lost the target to carry out their plan. How could they not feel helpless? After the blue sky temple swallowed the will of heaven and earth, the entire treasure began to shake violently. An increasingly powerful aura began to spread from it, and strange cracking sounds kept coming from it. Waves of green light kept flowing out from it. However, this time, the green light did not disperse, nor did it completely condense into a green figure to attack the opponent. Instead, it turned into a cloud that enveloped the blue sky temple, making it look like it was shrouded in a green mist. It was very mysterious. It was very mysterious. This change lasted for a while before it subsided. When all the changes calmed down, the aura emitted by the magic treasure had reached several hundred times its original strength. Compared to when the magic treasure had first appeared, which was before it was damaged, its power was more than 100 times stronger. Clearly, it had obtained great benefits from the will of heaven and earth. Of course, all the materials needed to upgrade it to a true pseudo-sage treasure had already been gathered. However, upgrading a half-step pseudo-sage treasure to pseudo-sage was not something that could be done in one go. Although the power of the blue sky temple had increased by hundreds of times, it was still a half-step pseudo-sage treasure. It had yet to cross the limit and truly set foot on the 9 steps. Because of this, although Xianwen had already obtained a lot of benefits from this half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure and had completely recovered from all the injuries he had suffered, he was still able to recover from his injuries. Even his aura was several times stronger than when he was at his peak, but he still had not broken through the limit and stepped on the 9 steps to become a pseudo-sage. However, even so, Xianwen was already overjoyed. His face was full of smiles, and his mind moved slightly. The blue sky temple shook, and the green clouds around it swayed slightly, turning into a huge pseudo-sage figure. The strength of this huge figure was more than 1,000 times stronger than that of the hundreds and thousands of green figures. Although it was still on the first step, which was the level of a level 1 pseudo-saint, it was more than 10 times stronger than the combined strength of the hundreds of figures back then. This figure was currently holding a square temple in his hand, and his face was extremely similar to Xianwen's. After this figure appeared, he lowered his head to look at his own body, then raised his hand to look at the square temple in his hand. The corners of his mouth pulled into a cold smile as he said, "Now, it is time to repay kindness with kindness and take revenge with enmity." His voice was Xianwen's voice. After saying this, he raised his head and stared at the clone of the Yin God Church's leader and the Wuhan Monastery's master. The golden-armored deity and the Wuhan Monastery's master looked at each other helplessly. Then, without any warning, they each raised their hands to cover themselves. The dozen or so cultivators that belonged to the two sects were instantly taken into their respective half-step pseudo-sage treasures. Then, the 2 half-step pseudo-sage treasures rushed up in the direction they had come from. which was the original exit of the space-time tunnel. They were extremely fast. Almost in an instant, they had taken all the cultivators, rushed up, and arrived at the entrance of the space-time tunnel. They were fast, but Xianwen's reaction was not slow either. When the green figure arrived at the entrance, he suddenly appeared in front of them. The square temple in his hand suddenly expanded into a cube that was 10 feet wide, and he suddenly blasted it at the two of them. This blast even caused the void to distort, time to break, and the nomological laws to break. One could imagine how powerful it was. If the blast landed on the golden armored deity and the half-step pseudo-sage treasures of the Wuwen Monastery, although it would not be able to destroy them completely, it would definitely be enough to cause them to suffer great damage, which would greatly reduce their power. The golden armored deity and the half-step pseudo-sage treasures of the Wuwen Monastery did not dare to be hit by the blast directly. They twisted in midair and quickly changed their direction, dodging the blast and causing it to hit nothing but air. However, even though they had dodged the terrifying attack, it had also disrupted their plan to continue escaping. When the aftermath of the blast subsided, Xianwen was already floating quietly in front of them. At the same time, the main body of the sky green temple appeared there. "Why did the two of you leave in such a hurry?" "I haven't repaid the two of you for taking care of me just now," Xianwen said calmly. Although he did not sound like he was gritting his teeth, the charm in his words sent chills down one's spine. "It seems like we won't be able to settle this peacefully today." The golden armored deity sighed. "You must be Luo Fan, right? Since you can cooperate with sect leader Xianwen, I believe it should not be impossible for you to cooperate with us. I wonder what we should do for you to help us upgrade this treasure to the true pseudo-sage grade, just like how you treated sect leader Xianwen." The master of the Wuwen Monastery did not look at Xianwen, nor did she speak to him. Instead, she turned around and spoke to Luo Fan, who was floating quietly in midair and looking at them calmly. Xianwen's expression changed slightly when he heard this. He raised his hand and wanted to attack directly, but after some thought, he put his hand down. This was because he could feel that the power of the sky green temple was hundreds of times stronger than before, and his own cultivation was also much stronger than before. However, he still did not have the slightest bit of confidence in facing Luo Fan in the sky green mystery realm. Now that he had interrupted their communication with Luo Fan, it was certainly refreshing. However, he might directly offend Luo Fan because of this and cause Luo Fan to be dissatisfied. If that was the case, if Luo Fan were to attack him because of this, wouldn't he fall at the final juncture of success? Because of this consideration, even though he knew that it was not a good thing to let the master of the Wuwen Monastery communicate with Luo Fan, and it might even cause the master of the Wuwen Monastery and the others to turn over a new leaf. However, he could only watch from the side. When will I be able to do whatever I want without any restrictions, without any scruples? This helpless reality caused Xianwen's mind to involuntarily flash with such a thought. His expression also became extremely ugly. If Luo Fan knew what he was thinking now, he would definitely scoff at it. Without any restrictions, he could do whatever he wanted. This was something that even sages could not do. Just look at the 7 sages in the universe on Earth. There were many restrictions when they did things, and they had to make countless calculations. They even had to consider what would happen billions of trillions of years in the future before they could decide what to do now. Being so careful was like walking on thin ice. How could they do whatever they wanted? Apart from the 7 sages in the universe on Earth, there were 54 sages in the realm of demons. However, based on the information that Luo Fan had heard about the sages, there were countless battles and plots between them. There were also countless battles and schemes between the sages. They even had to work together to kill each other from time to time. In this kind of situation, how could it be said that he could do whatever he wanted? Even sages were like that. For someone like Xian, who had just touched the boundary of pseudo-sage, it would be a dream for him to achieve this step. Unfortunately, Luo Fan did not know what Xianwen was thinking, so he could not look down on him. He continued the master of the Wuwen Monastery and said with a smile, "I can't upgrade a specific half-step pseudo-sage artifact to a real pseudo-sage artifact. That's not what Brother Xianwen asked me to do just now." The master of the Wuhan monastery was a shrewd person. Seeing that Xianwen did not interrupt her, she knew that Xianwen was afraid of Luo Fan and could not help but smile inexplicably. As for what Luo Fan said, it wasn't anything too obscure, but she knew what Luo Fan meant as soon as she heard it. It took our sect tens of billions of years to refine this half-step pseudo-holiness magic treasure. So we've naturally learned how to upgrade this magic treasure to a true pseudo-holiness magic treasure. The only thing we're lacking is the strength to fulfill this condition. If Brother Luo Fan is willing to make a deal, you only need to help us do this, and you can name the required reward, the master of the Wuhan monastery said. That's right. The Yin God cult is also willing to make a deal with you. The golden-armored deity who was possessed by the clone of the Yin God cult's leader said. Hearing that, Luo Fan chuckled and said, "There's nothing wrong with that. However, I need to know what to do first so that I can know if I can do it. Only then can I determine what kind of reward will be equal to what I'm willing to pay. But to be honest, I actually don't think you can come up with what I need." Luo Fan then added such a sentence. That was what he was really thinking. For him, he could create everything by himself. Even if he couldn't create something, he could collect it with his own strength. He didn't have much expectation that the Yin God cult and Wuyin nunnery could give him something that would interest him. The master of the Wuhan monastery and the Yin God cult's leader looked at each other and smiled faintly. As sect leaders who had controlled a sect with a history of trillions of years, the master of Wuhan nunnery and the master of the Dark God cult were very confident. They definitely did not think that their sect would not be able to take out something that would interest them. As long as they could offer it, there was a high chance that the deal would be completed. In other words, their two half-step pseudo-divinity treasures were very likely to be upgraded to the pseudo-divinity level, just like the Azure Temple. If that was the case, then this encounter could be said to be a blessing in disguise. Brother, you worry too much. I think the accumulation of our sects for trillions of years should be able to satisfy you. Why don't we find a place to talk about the contents of the deal? The master of the Wuhan monastery said to Luo Fan with a smile. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Starting Point and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please read it at MT. Chapter 1240. Luo Fan smiled when he heard the Wuhan monastery master's words. That's easy. As he spoke, he raised his hand and grabbed at the air. In an instant, a tall mountain suddenly rose from the ground below. The mountain was extremely tall, but its surface was as smooth as a mirror. One could tell with a glance that it was not a naturally formed mountain. There was an extremely flat and smooth platform at the top of the mountain. As the mountain took shape, the material on the platform was reconstructed and a majestic building appeared. The building looked like a stone house. The stone house was extremely simple, but it gave off an indescribable charm. The mysteriousness of it even made Xianwen and the others feel enlightened. They even faintly felt like they were about to enter a state of enlightenment. "Please," said Luo Fan with a smile. Hearing Luo Fan's words, everyone present, including Xianwen, who was a little unhappy by the side, could only bow and greet him. Following Luo Fan, they landed on the platform and landed in front of the stone house. The stone house looked so small from above, but when they actually landed, they realized how huge the stone house was. The entire stone house was dozens of feet tall, and it looked like a giant's residence. If it was not for the fact that the entrance of the stone house was only 10 feet tall, since they were already here, they naturally could not stay outside the stone house. Luo Fan pushed the door open and entered the stone house. A boundless starry sky instantly appeared in everyone's eyes. If a cultivator from the age of Dharma ending saw this starry sky, they would definitely know that it was the starry sky from the age of Dharma ending. They would definitely know that this was the starry sky from the age of Dharma ending. The boundless starry sky gave off an aura that Luo Fan was extremely familiar with. Xianwen and the others could not help but frown the moment they saw the starry sky. The starry sky was too foreign to them. Moreover, the many aspects revealed by the starry sky whether it was the stability of time or the stability of the void, or even the complexity of the rules and laws in the depths, were far inferior to the sky-green mystery land they were currently in, let alone the devil realm they were born in. Invited to come here. No matter what, they were still in charge of a sect. For Xianwen and the others, who had been living in the holy land of cultivation for hundreds of millions of years, it was as if they had instantly fallen from paradise into a stinking ditch. Of course, that feeling was extremely unpleasant. Luo Fan saw their discomfort and smiled. Here, this is my hometown. This is fellow Taoist's hometown. Xianwen was shocked. He was not as unfamiliar with Luo Fan as the Wuhan monastery master and the Yinshin cult master were. He knew that Luo Fan came from a world with a saint. He looked at the starry sky again, still not believing Luo Fan's words, and shook his head with a smile. Fellow Taoist, please don't joke around. Such a starry sky. He even suspected that it was difficult to nurture a sage-to-be. He would not believe that there was a saint even if he was beaten to death. I'm not joking. This is indeed my hometown. However, it only exists about countless trillions of years from now, Luo Fan said with a smile. Trillions of years from now. As soon as he said that, everyone present felt an indescribable sense of shock. Even though cultivators like them had countless years of lifespan, and even they themselves had lived for tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of years, they still found it hard to imagine the inconceivable description of time like countless trillion years. They felt that their souls had suffered an indescribable shock. That's impossible. In this world, how is it possible for someone to travel through trillions of years and return to the past? The golden-armored deity carefully raised his doubts. Haha, I naturally can't do it alone. However, in our world, there is an existence that can do it. Of course, in your world, there is also such an existence. Luo Fan smiled. His words instantly made the master of Wuhan Monastery and the golden-armored deity understand. For a moment, their faces were filled with shock. This kind of shock was even more intense than the shock and astonishment they felt when they saw Luo Fan. In fact, the two of them could no longer maintain their calm expressions. They looked at Luo Fan as if they were looking at a monster. Based on their knowledge, there was only one kind of existence that could send a living being back trillions of years, and that was a saint. Only an omnipotent, omniscient saint could do such an exaggerated and unbelievable thing. A world with a saint? Could this be the legendary extraterritorial world with a saint? This thought instantly appeared in the minds of the Yin God sect's master and the master of Wuhan Monastery, causing their perception of the world in front of them to change drastically. Luo Fan took a step forward, and his figure instantly traversed a distance of trillions of light years. He arrived in a galaxy with 9 planets, and he floated above a blue planet. Although this place was so far away from where he had been standing before, and it would take hundreds of millions of years for light to travel there, in this space-time that was like the Earth's universe, this distance was nothing to Xianwen, who was a pseudo-sanctuary being. It was just like the distance between ordinary people by a single step. Therefore, after Luo Fan arrived, Xianwen and the other two also traversed the void and arrived beside Luo Fan. The master of Wuhan Monastery and the master of Wuhan Monastery did not hear Luo Fan talk about his origin, so they were not as clear as Xianwen that Luo Fan came from another world. However, the two of them were, after all, extraordinarily intelligent. After hearing what Luo Fan had said, they had already guessed Luo Fan's origin. Moreover, as they had obtained this answer based on various pieces of evidence, they did not have the same doubts and distrust towards Luo Fan as Xianwen did in the past. This is the place where I was born. Luo Fan looked at the blue planet. He sighed. This starry sky should be the ruins left behind after the world was destroyed, right? To be able to grow to such a state from an ordinary planet in the ruins, fellow Taoist ability is truly shocking, said the master of the 5 Mysteries Monastery. It's just a coincidence. Luo Fan smiled and took a step forward, arriving on the surface of the blue planet. Although this starry sky that seemed to have been created by him during the age of degeneration, Everything in it was created according to what he knew about the structure of the universe on Earth. Even this blue planet is no exception. At this moment, there are billions of people densely packed on this planet. Their distribution. They were distributed according to what Luo Fan knew before he transmigrated. The technological level of this planet was also maintained at the level before he transmigrated. It was not what he saw after he returned. It was also not what he saw in the end. The technological level after he transmigrated tens of thousands of years ago. That familiar appearance, that familiar voice, that familiar smell, that familiar aura. Luo Fan could not help but have a nostalgic look in his eyes. He landed in front of a coffee shop. This cafe was a place he had been to once or twice in the past. At that time, he watched a very romantic love movie and had the idea of pretending to be a petty bourgeois in his heart. Therefore, he invited his girlfriend, whom he had long forgotten, to this cafe and wasted half a month's salary to order a lot of food that he had only heard of but never seen before. Of course, after he came out, he immediately regretted it. That was for sure. When he came here again, this place looked exactly the same as when he had brought his girlfriend here. After sitting in the same seat, he suddenly realized that he was completely different from before. This was a seat that he had sat in previously, but he was not used to sitting in it now. Of course, it was impossible for Xianwen and the others to lose Luo Fan. After Luo Fan sat down, they also came to this cafe. They could clearly sense everything on this planet with just a slight sense, so it was not difficult for them to know that Luo Fan was here. The three of them sat opposite Luo Fan. Finally, Xianwen said to Luo Fan, "There don't seem to be many cultivators on this planet. Even if there are, they are too weak." After all, this was everything that Luo Fan had created. Many of the living creatures here were existences that existed in between reality and illusion, so their reactions were naturally different from real living creatures. Luo Fan's group of 4 were dressed completely differently from the ordinary people on this planet, but no one was surprised to see them. Even after they sat down, a waiter came up to ask them what they wanted. After Luo Fan casually ordered some of the things that he had ordered before, he let Xianwen and the others order. Although Xianwen and the others weren't interested in the things on this planet, they didn't mind playing this kind of game with Luo Fan. Each of them smiled and pointed at something that they felt was a little interesting. Indeed, I haven't been here for a long time. Seeing this familiar scene again, I suddenly feel like the world has changed. Luo Fan sighed. "All right, let's not talk about this anymore. Now let's talk about our deal." After sighing, Luo Fan smiled and said to the master of Wuhan Monastery and the golden armored deity. These words were like a switch that instantly broke the harmonious atmosphere between the few people present. Xianwen's expression changed slightly, while the expressions of the 5 Mysteries Monastery Master and the Yin God religious leader also became a little hesitant. It was only natural that Xuanwen's expression turned ugly. Originally, the 2 clones of the Master of the Wuhan Monastery and the Golden Armored Deity, as well as the 2 half-step pseudo-sage magic treasures, were about to fall into his hands. However, due to Luo Fan's existence, he had no choice but to reconsider and watch them escape. In this way, it would be strange if he could still look good. It was not difficult to understand why the Master of Wuhan Monastery and the Golden Armored Deity had hesitant expressions on their faces. Originally, they thought that their sect would be able to find something that could satisfy Luo Fan after hundreds of millions of years of accumulation. They thought that they would be able to find a suitable reward for Luo Fan to help them upgrade the 2 half-step pseudo-sage treasures to the true pseudo-sage level. However, they did not expect that Luo Fan could create such an ordinary but rather complete universe with just a casual move. This was the kind of truth that was revealed. The means of creating matter, creating energy, and even creating everything was not something that they could imagine at all. In this way, the things that they originally wanted to trade with Luo Fan could be created by him with just a thought. In this case, why would he help them refine the treasures for these things that he could easily obtain? Moreover, apart from that, what Luo Fan had shown, such an incredible means. It represented his almost omnipotent power. If that was the case, it would not be difficult for the other party to forcibly refine the two pseudo-saint artifacts that they had refined for hundreds of millions of years. That was the benefit that they were willing to offer. Not only did they have to make Luo Fan interested, they had to be at least more precious than the two half-step pseudo-sage treasures. At least to Luo Fan, they were more precious than the two half-step pseudo-sage treasures. If that was not the case, there was no need for him to give up the two half-step pseudo-sage treasures and let them go. He even helped them upgrade the two half-step pseudo-sage treasures to the true pseudo-sage level. With this understanding, it was no wonder that the two of them looked hesitant. Luo Fan's question instantly made the scene fall silent. After a while, the waiter of the cafe came up and presented the things that the four of them had ordered. Luo Fan drank the familiar coffee and ate the familiar snacks with a faint smile on his face. These things were like turbid air to him right now. There was no benefit to eating them at all. In fact, they would naturally turn into nothingness as soon as they passed through his throat. However, the familiar taste made him reminisce about the past. Various scenes from the past slowly surfaced in the depths of his memories, and there was a nostalgic look in his eyes. Xianwen and the others also tried the things that they had ordered. Although they were thinking they were not mortals after all, they would not completely lose their perception of the outside world because of this, and it was not a problem for them to eat something. They were cultivators born from a cultivation holy land like the Demon Realm, but they did not have a rich past like Luo Fan. Naturally, they could not taste the nostalgia that Luo Fan had for these turbid things in the mortal world. As soon as they entered their mouths, the turbid qi contained in the food made them feel nauseous. However, none of them swallowed these things. They turned the food into nothingness almost directly in their mouths, completely eliminating it at once. After taking the first bite, none of the three of them had the courage to take a second bite. However, as they watched Luo Fan eat the food bite by bite, they suddenly felt a sense of admiration. Indeed, the strong would always be strong. His endurance was not something that they could compare with. At the half-step pseudo-sage level, the speed of thinking had already reached a height that ordinary mortals could not even imagine. Although it had only been a short while, the two of them had already thought through countless thoughts, and they had already thought through everything clearly. They had all made up their minds. The master of the Wuhan monastery was the first to speak. With a slight thought, a light screen naturally formed in the void, forming a three-dimensional image. On the image was an extremely mysterious and strange thing that seemed to be everything, but also seemed to be nothing at the same time. The feeling it gave off was extremely similar to the feeling of this half-step pseudo-sage treasure. The master of the Wuhan monastery looked at this strange thing with a regretful expression on her face, but it soon disappeared. She said, "This is a fragment of a pseudo-sage treasure. Back then, the founder of our sect obtained this fragment and comprehended the inheritance of our Wuhan monastery from it. That's why our Wuhan monastery is what it is today. If you are willing to help us upgrade this half-step pseudo-sage treasure to the true pseudo-sage treasure, our sect is willing to repay you with this fragment." "You even took out this treasure?" Xianwen was shocked. The three sects were closely related and had been in an alliance for such a long time. Naturally, they had a deep understanding of each other. How could they not know that there was indeed such a fragment of a pseudo-sage treasure in the Wuhan monastery? Disregarding the power of this fragment, just the fact that it was the foundation of the sect's founder's inheritance alone was enough to make it unimaginably precious. Now that the master of the Wuhan monastery had actually taken out this fragment, it could be said that she had really put in a lot of effort. It was no wonder that Xianwen was so concerned about it. A fragment of a pseudo-sage treasure? Luo Fan's eyes lit up as he looked at the scene on the light screen. He was a little curious. Of course, he was just curious. He had seen many fragments of pseudo-sage treasures. In the battlefield of the chaotic Lost Ocean, there were countless fragments of pseudo-sage treasures of level 9 pseudo-sage treasures. It all depended on whether one was capable enough to obtain them. Therefore, although he was interested in this fragment of a pseudo-sage treasure, he did not think that it was very precious. According to the research of the past patriarchs, this fragment belongs to an ancient level, 9 Pseudo-Sage Buddha. It is said that it contains a great secret, and it is related to an opportunity to attain Tao. The master of the Wuhan monastery saw that Luo Fan was only curious, but did not seem to be tempted. Thus, she could only add to the price. A fragment of a level 9 Pseudo-Sage treasure. Luo Fan was finally tempted this time. Chapter 1241. However, this was only in terms of absolute value. Perhaps to Luo Fan, this level 9 Pseudo-Sage artifact fragment was many times more valuable than refining a half-step Pseudo-Sage artifact into the true Pseudo-Sage artifact. However, to the temple master of Wuhan Temple, this was obviously not the case. To the master of the Wuhan nunnery, this artifact fragment was more of a souvenir. In contrast, if they had a Pseudo-Sage artifact, even if it was only a level 1 Pseudo-Sage artifact, it would be an unimaginable boost to the strength of the Wuhan nunnery. The answer to which of the two was more valuable was obvious. There was no need to think too much about it. Luo Fan naturally could not reject such a deal. He smiled faintly and said, "If I can fulfill the condition of helping your sect upgrade this magic treasure, then I agree to this deal." Hearing this, the temple master of Wuhan Temple was overjoyed. Although she did not know if Luo Fan could do what she wanted Luo Fan to do, she could tell from Luo Fan's expression that Luo Fan was very interested in what she offered. This meant that it was highly possible that she could keep this half-step Pseudo-Sage artifact. Even if Luo Fan could not do that, she could use other conditions to convince him. "This might be extremely difficult for us, but it is a piece of cake for you," said the temple master of Wuhan Temple. "Oh, tell me about it." Luo Fan could not help but be curious. What kind of thing is so difficult for them, but so easy for me? This artifact is lacking 5 complete nomological networks. As long as 5 complete nomological networks are integrated into it, this artifact will be able to break through its limit and upgrade from the half-step Pseudo-Sage artifact to the true Pseudo-Sage artifact. Therefore, as long as you can hand over the complete nomological law network that is compatible with each other, we will give you the treasure fragment, said the master of the Temple of 5 Veins. 5 complete, complementary, and mutually compatible networks of laws. Luo Fan couldn't help but look at the temple master of 5 Mysteries Monastery in surprise. However, it was not impossible to break through. After all, it was only the law layer. Compared to the vague and untraceable existence of the Azure Temple's will of the heaven and earth, ordinary cultivators would be able to sense it slightly. For quasi-sage stage cultivators, it was as easy as reading the lines on their palms. The difficulty of extraction was simply too low. How could it be like how the Azure Temple treated the world's will? Stop Wuhan? There must be a lot of difficulties in this. I don't think you need to wait for me to strike. Fellow Taoist, please speak clearly, Luo Fan said. The master of the Temple of Wuhan's expression changed slightly when she heard this, but she soon let out a sigh and said, "We've actually found the 5 worlds, but there's a natural formation between the 5 worlds that prevents cultivators below the pseudo-sacred realm from entering. So, the 5 skies form a natural grand formation? There's actually such a grand formation? I've never heard of it before." Luo Fan's eyes lit up when he heard this. Such a 5 worlds piqued his interest. At this point, even if Temple Master Wu went and did not reward him, he still wanted to go to that mysterious place to take a look. "All right, since there's such a mysterious place, I'll follow you there. If I can enter it, it'll be considered a success," Luo Fan said with a smile. As for what would happen if he couldn't enter, he didn't say anything. There was no need for him to say anything. After all, if he couldn't enter, then the deal naturally couldn't proceed. Hearing Luo Fan's words, Temple Master Wu was finally relieved and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." After the Temple Master of the 5 Veins Monastery and Luo Fan finished their discussion, the golden-armored deity that was possessed by the clone of the Yin God Sect Master began to discuss the matter of the transaction with Luo Fan. He also waved his hand to summon a light screen, and a strange object appeared on the light screen. This object was extremely strange. It looked like a ring, but there were no signs of carving at all. Instead, it seemed to be naturally formed, and it emitted an aura that Luo Fan was familiar with. This aura was not the aura of the demon realm, but the aura of the Earth universe. It was obvious that this object came from the Earth universe. It was born from Luo Fan, the world that had 7 sages, an extremely long history, and the birth of countless powerful cultivators. This ring is a strange object that our sect's 300 generations of ancestors obtained by chance after attaining the Tao. This object is obviously from the outer realm, and its sturdiness far surpasses that of a half-step pseudo-sage artifact. However, we have no idea what it is or what kind of secrets it possesses. I think that fellow Taoist must be interested in such an item, so I boldly took it out to trade with fellow Taoist. I wonder if fellow Taoist is interested? The golden-armored deity said to Luo Fan. Luo Fan looked at the ring that seemed to be formed naturally, but it was extremely smooth and neat. His heart was filled with curiosity. Such a naturally formed object that had such a rich aura that belonged to the Earth universe was obviously from the Earth universe. However, it couldn't even destroy so many half-step pseudo-holiness stage beings, much less understand it. In that case, it had to be at least a pseudo-holiness stage being. As for which pseudo-holiness stage it would have to be carefully considered. Such a ring, for Luo Fan, of course, had a lot of attraction. Tell me what you need. If I can do it, we can complete the trade, Luo Fan said as he made up his mind. For him now, external objects were no longer important. Even if he obtained the fragments of a level 9 pseudo-sage artifact, he would at most use them to comprehend the mysteries within them and search for the principles that were beneficial to his cultivation. However, he wouldn't treat it as an important treasure. Under such circumstances, the ring was special. It gave him the desire to explore it, and that was enough. Of course, what he needed to do in exchange for this ring would depend on the situation. If the price was too high, he wouldn't be willing to do it. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the golden-armored deity's eyes lit up. He glanced at Xianwen, who had an ugly expression, and said with a smile, "This isn't difficult. All you need to do is completely refine a specific piece of heaven and earth with the artifact. Refine a piece of heaven and earth with a half-step pseudo-sage artifact? That shouldn't be too difficult, right? Why do you need me to do it?" Luo Fan said calmly. Indeed, even Xianwen himself could integrate the power of a part of the world with the power in his body. With the power of countless half-step pseudo-saints in the Yin God sect over the past hundreds of millions of years, wanting to fuse a piece of heaven and earth with a physical pseudo-sage artifact. Obviously, it shouldn't be difficult. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the golden-armored deity smiled and said, "The piece of heaven and earth that you need to refine into a half-step pseudo-sage artifact is a little special. There are many powerhouses in it. Their combined strength is slightly stronger than that of our sect. So, what you mean is, you want me to go to that piece of heaven and earth and defeat those living beings that are stronger than your entire sect, destroying their ability to resist. Then, you can easily fuse that piece of heaven and earth with this half-step pseudo-sage artifact?" Luo Fan asked calmly. "That's the main procedure." The golden-armored deity nodded and said with some shame, "Since the power in that piece of heaven and earth is stronger than your entire sect, why should I go against it? Why don't I go to your sect directly and snatch what I need from your hands against the power of your entire sect? That seems simpler." Luo Fan looked at the golden-armored deity and said with an extremely indifferent expression. These words made Xianwen overjoyed, but the golden-armored deity's expression changed drastically. At the same time, the expression of the temple master of Wuyan Monastery also changed drastically. Don't joke around. The golden-armored deity forced himself to say that. He was indeed terrified, just like what Luo Fan had said, since he had the ability to completely destroy the many living beings in that piece of heaven and earth that were stronger than their entire sect. He could also directly fight his way to their sect and snatch the strange ring that they wanted to use for the trade. He did not even have any words to refute this fact. Therefore, at this moment, he could only use such powerless words to hope that Luo Fan did not really want to do that. All right, then I won't joke around anymore. I agree to this deal. Luo Fan listened to this and said with a slight smile. These words made the three of them let out a long breath of relief. Among them, Xianwen was disappointed, but the Yin God Church Master and the Temple Master of Wuyin Monastery were relieved at the same time. They felt as if they had suddenly returned to the human world from hell. However, at the same time, the two of them completely dispelled the idea that they would turn against each other once they left. Although Luo Fan's words sounded like a joke to him, his attitude had already fully expressed his determination. If they really turned against each other and did not intend to carry out this trade, then it was very likely that Luo Fan would directly fight his way to their sect and snatch the two items that they had taken out. It could be said that Luo Fan's little joke was simply the most direct warning to them. All right, now that everything has been settled, there's no need for us to stay here any longer. Both of you go back and prepare yourselves. Once you're ready, come and inform me. I will naturally go with you. Luo Fan said. When the Yin God Church Master and the Temple Master of Wuyin Monastery heard this, they did not dare to delay and quickly stood up. After bidding farewell to Luo Fan, they took a few steps and left this planet, this universe, this green sky secret realm, and returned to the bottom of the sea in the demon realm. After returning here, they looked at each other and sighed. Without saying much, they walked along the platform and directly returned to the Wild Beast Spiritual Formation. The situation within the formation was very different from when Xianwen had left. At this moment, the area occupied by the Green Sky Temple had been completely flooded by the Yin God Church and the Temple Master of Wuyin Monastery. Almost all the cultivators of the Green Sky Temple had been restrained. Moreover, the Yin God Church Master and the Temple Master of Wuyin Monastery had already appeared on the largest cave abode among the cave abodes, which was also the most important center of the Green Sky Temple. In this entire area, at this moment, the entire area was scorched. More than 20% of the cultivators in the entire Green Sky Temple had died. Even the most high-level elders had died. The remaining cultivators were currently restrained not far away from the Yin God Church Master and the Temple Master of Wuyin Monastery. Their faces were ashen and their eyes were filled with anger and hatred that could burn the Yin God Church Master and the Temple Master of Wuyin Monastery into ashes. The Yin God Church Master and the Temple Master of Wuyin Monastery smiled bitterly when the two half-step pseudo-sage treasures entered the Wild Beast Spiritual Formation. I didn't expect it to turn out like this. The Yin God Church Master sighed. Yeah, I thought that with the addition of two half-step pseudo-sage treasures, we would definitely be able to settle this easily. The Temple Master of Wuyin Monastery also sighed. She said, "What now? How about just destroy the Green Sky Temple?" The Yin God Church Master's eyes flashed, and he said with a faint smile, "Destroy? Hee, are you joking?" The Temple Master of Wuyin Monastery also looked back with a faint smile. "It's just a suggestion. Why so serious?" The Yin God Church Master chuckled. He took the opportunity to change the topic. Destroy the Green Sky Temple? Xianwen was currently in the Green Sky Secret Realm. He couldn't stop them. It would be extremely easy for them to do that. However, what would happen after they destroyed it? One had to know. The relationship between Xianwen and Luo Fan was much closer than the relationship between them and Luo Fan. The reason why they were able to return here first was because Luo Fan was magnanimous and let them go. If they destroyed the Green Sky Temple because they returned first, they would definitely offend Luo Fan. If he was unhappy and attacked them, the consequences would be unimaginable. Therefore, it was obviously impossible to destroy the Green Sky Temple. In fact, not only could they not destroy the Green Sky Temple, they should also leave this place as soon as possible and eliminate all the consequences that they had caused. That way, they could guarantee the safety of both sects to the greatest extent. However, it was a pity that so many people had died in the Green Sky Temple. It was obviously impossible to eliminate all the consequences that they had caused. Therefore, after the two of them looked at each other, they simultaneously chose the most direct method. They didn't remove the restrictions placed on the elders and disciples of the Green Sky Temple. Instead, They directly used their half-step pseudo-sage treasures and led their disciples away from the area occupied by the Green Sky Temple. They returned to their original areas. Many of the cultivators in the Azure Sky Temple were confused by this turn of events. They could not make heads or tails of what was going on. After quite a while, those higher-ups that knew exactly what Xianwen was going to do finally recovered from their shock, and they roughly guessed exactly what had happened. For a time, they felt joy, rage, sorrow, and all sorts of emotions. The complicated feelings caused them to cry and laugh as if they'd gone mad. In the Green Sky Temple, Luo Fan and Xianwen had already left the Earth universe that Luo Fan had created. The two of them were floating above the strange mountain that had appeared not long ago. This deal should be considered completed. Luo Fan smiled at Xianwen. At this moment, Xianwen was both depressed and excited. He was depressed because of the deal that Luo Fan had made with the Yin God Church Master and the Temple Master of Wuwen Monastery in front of him. On the other hand, he was excited because he had removed the last obstacle for the Green Sky Temple to become a pseudo-sage. The Green Sky Temple was about to become a pseudo-sage, and he was about to become a level 1 pseudo-sage. This complicated feeling made him want to laugh out loud, but also want to curse loudly. Unfortunately, the terrifying magic power that Luo Fan had displayed just now put too much pressure on him. He did not dare to show these two attitudes at all. After hearing what Luo Fan said, he could only say, "Thank you for your help. If not for you, I don't know how many generations it would take to find a way to extract the will of the heaven and earth." Ha ha! Luo Fan only laughed. He continued, "I don't think your sect has much use for this heaven and earth. Why don't you leave it to me? If you want it, feel free to take it." Xianwen really did not need this heaven and earth anymore. After hearing what Luo Fan said, he did not have any thoughts of rejecting and said directly. As he spoke, he thought about the situation in the sect. After all, he was still worried, so he bid farewell to Luo Fan. He only said that he wanted to inform his senior and junior brothers of the good news as soon as possible, and it was not convenient for him to chat with Luo Fan. Hearing this, Luo Fan naturally knew what he was thinking. He did not say much and just chuckled. After the deal with the Temple Master and the Yin God Church, he naturally could not follow Xianwen to the Savage Beast spiritual formation. Anyway, he still wanted to see the changes after the heaven and earth lost its will, so he might as well stay in this heaven and earth alone. As for whether the space-time tunnel between this heaven and earth and the demon realm would be damaged and he would not be able to enter the demon realm again, Luo Fan was not worried at all. It was not that he felt that it was impossible for the three sects to destroy the tunnel, but if he wanted to enter the demon realm, he did not need to use the tunnel at all. At that moment, he already had the location information of the demon realm. Even if there was no space-time tunnel, he could open a new one based on this information. In fact, the new tunnel might even be more direct and shorter. With such confidence, why would he still need to worry about the problem of entering and leaving? Chapter 1242. Luo Fan sat cross-legged in the sky-green secret realm. His entire spirit merged with the heaven and earth. The moment his spirit merged with the heaven and earth, he suddenly felt as if the entire heaven and earth were breathing according to his breathing rhythm. Vaguely, his body seemed to have disappeared and was replaced by another body. It was a strange body that was many times weaker than his original body, but it was also many times larger than his original body. The power it contained was also many times greater. Luo Fan understood what was going on after being stunned for a moment. This was obviously because the heaven and earth lacked the world's will. Hence, the moment his spirit merged with the heaven and earth, it directly treated his will as the world's will. At this moment, he felt that his body was the heaven and earth. Luo Fan could not help but smile when he sensed such a wonderful body. It was a rather wonderful feeling. Although cultivators could be self-sufficient after becoming Khanate Grand Luo, and their bodies were actually a small world, a small universe. However, it was still the body of a living being, and its form of existence was still extremely different from the real heaven and earth. At this moment, the feeling of treating the heaven and earth as his own body was extremely novel to Luo Fan. At the same time, it made him feel that his spirit was constantly receiving a large amount of mysterious information. Among the information, almost all of it was about the current state of the heaven and earth and the state of something in the heaven and earth. However, there was also a small part of it that involved a complete network of rules and laws. Or, it involved a complete layer of rules and laws. When he discovered the truth of the information, Luo Fan made a decision decisively. He directly isolated the countless information about the specific state of everything in the heaven and earth. The specific method was to use his own will as a transit and let the information flow into his will. There was no change at all, and the information directly leaked out from another direction. While he was isolating this information, he carefully received the complete information on the law layer contained within the information. The layer of rules and laws of any heaven and earth contained extremely profound mysteries. Even the heaven and earth that Luo Fan opened up was the same. These profound mysteries. It wasn't difficult to comprehend by itself, but it was all-encompassing and extremely complicated. Even an existence like Luo Fan would have to spend countless millions of years to completely comprehend it, because it would take such a long time. Therefore, although Luo Fan could now open up a world, or even a great thousand world as easy as flipping his palm, he had never completely comprehended all the laws and laws of a world. In other words, all the mysteries of an entire layer of laws and laws. At this very moment, the mysteries of the entire layer of laws were actively fusing into his memory, actively transforming into a state that he could understand and was rapidly absorbed by him. To him, this was naturally a rather good thing. In fact, it could even be said to be a rather considerable opportunity. There was no way he would let them go. As the mysteries of the law layer continued to fuse with his heart, Luo Fan gradually felt more and more transparent. The layer of laws and laws of a world was all-encompassing. Completely mastering all the mysteries of the complete layer of laws and laws was equivalent to completely mastering all aspects of the world. For Luo Fan, this was equivalent to an expansion of his cultivation achievements, allowing him to reorganize all his past cultivation achievements in a different way. From then on, he would be able to evolve everything in this world in his own way. Luo Fan's body floated in the void. In the process of his will merging with the world, the entire world stretched and shrank and shook. Everything in the entire world was gradually filled with an inexplicable aura. It was a mysterious aura that even allowed anyone to sense it to obtain a Dao Master's mark. It was an aura that belonged to Luo Fan. At first, this aura was only faint and indistinct. But as time passed, this aura became more and more intense. It grew stronger and stronger. After a few days, the aura was so thick that it was almost tangible, and countless strange scenes appeared in the world. This world was because of these scenes. It was as if it had been divided into countless worlds and space-times. Although these worlds and space-times were somewhat illusory, they were all incomparably complete. Even all the laws and laws within them could form a complete, self-consistent whole. This state even made people suspect that even if the light and shadows evolved from these auras were thrown into the void, out of the world, or even into the state of chaos, they would be able to grow naturally and become complete, real space-times, real worlds, and would not need to rely on the existence of any world at all. Of course, this was only the feeling. But even so, this was enough to show how mysterious and incredible the world evolved from these auras was. And this was not the end of the changes in these auras. In the next month or two, these changes continued to intensify, and the concentration of the auras became more and more intense. Between the heaven and earth, the light and shadows evolved from Luo Fan's aura also became more and more complex. The world formed from the auras became more and more complete. Faintly, more and more living beings with real spiritual intelligence were born from the auras. The Azure Secret Land that had been divided into countless space-times became like a real group of worlds, a group of space-times. During this process of change, Luo Fan's body had already become invisible, as if he had already integrated into the world and into the space-time. As for the contraction and vibration of the world, although it became more and more intense, it had already become one with the world, as if it had become an inherent property of the world. Instead, it was difficult to detect. This was just like how ordinary people living on a planet felt about the planet under their feet. Although the planet was constantly rotating and revolving, almost no ordinary person could feel the movement of the planet. Compared to the movement of the planet, the overall change of the entire world was more mysterious, more obscure, and at the same time, more difficult to detect. Naturally, the performance would only be more obvious and not less. One day after more than 2 months, a strange wave suddenly swept across the entire world. After that, an extremely subtle and mysterious change occurred in the world from the inside out. This change, to other living beings, was so obscure that it was difficult to detect. It was so obscure that it was difficult to detect. Even if they sensed the ripples and sensed that some sort of change had appeared in the world, they would not be able to grasp what exactly was happening. Only one kind of living being would be able to discover what exactly was happening in the world. That was Luo Fan's main body in this universe. It was the living being in the vast thousand world that his main body had opened up in the gap between the world and the state of chaos during the age of chaos. In other words, the living beings in the Law Realm, who were born because of the evolution of the Law Realm itself, would be able to discover that this was a change that had occurred in the world. This was because the change in this world was none other than the fact that it had been transformed into a state that was almost identical to the Law Realm. Of course, this state that was almost identical referred to the essence, the most fundamental change in the depths of the Law Realm. It was not the appearance, nor was it the appearance of the shape of the continent or the topography of the land. In other words, this world had become another Law Realm. It had become the most wonderful thing for the living beings in the Law Realm. It was the most familiar place. In the Law Realm, the living beings that grew up in accordance with Luo Fan's worldview would be able to cultivate without any obstacles, just like in the Law Realm. They would even be able to obtain the same boost and the same cultivation speed. As the world changed, Luo Fan's figure slowly appeared from nothingness. Then, the changes in the world gradually slowed down, and the aura that belonged to Luo Fan, which filled the entire world, gradually weakened and became thinner. The appearance of the world that had evolved from the many auras. It also gradually became illusory from its originally extremely real state. In the end, the countless space-time and the countless worlds became faintly discernible, leaving only a faint, illusory state. Finally, it completely stabilized and no longer continued to be illusory. It was as if the entire world had been born naturally. The appearance of the world naturally represented the level of the aura that belonged to Luo Fan in this world. It also maintained a faintly discernible and illusory state. This aura had already become the aura of the world itself, just like the aura of the demon realm itself and the aura of the earth and the universe itself. It had also become an inherent attribute. Luo Fan opened his eyes and looked at the world that had undergone a huge change. He could not help but smile faintly. Such a change in the world was not within his expectations, but it was even more wonderful than he had expected. The reason for such a change in the world was actually very simple. It was because when he fused his spirit with the world lacked a world will. So the first world will that fused with the world was naturally treated as the world's world will. Not only did this allow Luo Fan to receive the infinite information that belonged to the world, but it also allowed him to receive the complete mysteries of the law layer in a very short period of time, which would have taken him hundreds of millions of years to comprehend. It also allowed the world to be naturally assimilated and changed because of his will. After more than 2 months of change, this change had led to a qualitative change. The essence of the world was naturally reorganized according to his worldview, which was also according to the nomological worldview that he had sorted out himself. As a result, the world became another nomological world. This kind of change was like the entire world being reconstructed. It made the entire world seem like a brand new world, a brand new world. Such a change naturally allowed the world to give birth to the world will. As for the will of the heavens and earth, it was born under the influence of Luo Fan's will. Therefore, it was of the same origin as Luo Fan's will. Although the state it displayed was the true appearance of the world will, it was still a state of will that living beings could not understand. However, it had the essence of Luo Fan's will. In other words, the will of the heavens and earth was equivalent to transforming Luo Fan's will into the will of the heavens and earth, forming a kind of will of the heavens and earth. With such a world will, the world naturally displayed such a state. The world naturally displayed such a state. The aura within was naturally Luo Fan's aura, and the many strange space-times that Luo Fan's aura had evolved naturally became the inherent attribute of the world. Moreover, because the world will was of the same origin as Luo Fan's will, it was almost equivalent to a clone of Luo Fan at this moment. However, it allowed him to understand the world will of this world better than other world wills. Although this kind of understanding was still in the category of being unable to truly understand, it was still better than other world wills. Vaguely, he felt as if he was observing himself from a higher and broader perspective. An inexplicable feeling arose spontaneously. In a trance, he seemed to see a flight of stairs appearing in front of him. There were only 9 steps, but it directly led to an extremely hazy, extremely majestic, extremely noble, and extremely magnificent place. Extremely mysterious, extremely sacred, and so on and so forth. It was a supreme place that seemed to contain all the beautiful adjectives in the universe. Among the 9 steps, the first step seemed to be right in front of him. It felt as if he would be able to set foot on it if he took a small step forward. However, it also seemed to be an extremely distant place that would require him to spend billions of years to pursue. Only then could he really stand on it. Feeling all kinds of wonderful feelings and looking at the supreme place above the 9 steps that seemed to contain all the beautiful adjectives in the world, Luo Fan had an epiphany. These are the 9 steps below the sage realm, and the place that the 9 steps led to was the supreme and immortal place. The immortal, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipotent mixed essence Tao fruit. That was the sage realm. Finally, I've reached this step. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. He knew that the moment he saw these 9 steps, it meant that he had broken through the Tao Master realm and set foot on the half-step pseudo-saint realm. Once he really set foot on the first step that seemed to be extremely far away, but also seemed to be right in front of him, it meant that he had really reached the pseudo-saint realm and become a first-level pseudo-saint. However, with his current realm, it was still not enough for him to set foot on that step. He still lacked something to be able to really set foot on that step. Therefore, he could only stop at this realm and could not really become a pseudo-saint. These steps were not tangible steps. If he wanted to set foot on them, of course, he could not walk on them with his own body. Instead, he needed to rely on his own mind, his own perception, and his own cultivation to break the distance between himself and the steps. Once he broke the distance, he would naturally be able to stand on the steps, and he would not need to move his body at all. Because of this, Luo Fan was still standing outside the steps at this moment, which meant that his cultivation realm was still not enough to set foot on those steps. Luo Fan carefully experienced all this, and the steps in front of him gradually disappeared. After a while, they disappeared without a trace, leaving only Luo Fan alone, floating in this world that had changed greatly. Although it's still a little short, I've broken the barrier after all. I'm 1 step closer to the final goal. Luo Fan had a faint smile on his face, but he was extremely happy. In this perfect world, including the earth, the universe, and the demon realm, there were 2 ways for a cultivator to break through to his level. The first was the method of being a disciple of the sage. The sage would naturally bestow a magic treasure of an unknown level, but it was definitely beyond the level 9 pseudo-saint grade. Through comprehending it and unsealing it, they would be able to break through this half-step pseudo-saint grade and become a pseudo-saint grade 1, pseudo-saint. After that, there was no need to think about anything else. They only needed to constantly comprehend that magic treasure and continuously unseal that magic treasure. Their cultivation realm would naturally continue to rise until they reached the level 9 pseudo-saint grade and began to break through to the sage realm. As for the second method, it was more tragic. It was what Luo Fan understood. Using one's own strength to collect materials bit by bit and spending a long, endless time to refine a magic treasure to the pseudo-sage level. Then, with the power of this magic treasure's upgrade, one could break through the barrier of this step and become a pseudo-sage level 1. The cultivation process after that should be similar to this step. It was also constantly refining magic treasures to improve them, and then using the improvement of the magic treasure to improve. The huge difference between these two methods could be seen at a glance. The first method did not need to care about the magic treasure at all. One only needed to constantly comprehend the mysteries of the magic treasure and focus on one's own cultivation. Then, one would naturally be able to improve. As for the second method, it was extremely difficult. First, he had to gather the materials. Then he had to spend an endless amount of time to refine the magic treasure. In the end, after the magic treasure was upgraded by a level, he had to use the process of upgrading to give feedback to himself. Only then could he increase his own cultivation realm. Chapter 1243. These two methods were the two methods that Luo Fan currently knew of for a half-step pseudo-sage cultivator to become a pseudo-sage cultivator. According to Luo Fan's understanding, apart from the Earth universe, there was another way to become a pseudo-sage with the help of magic treasures. There was another way to become a pseudo-sage, or even a way to become a sage. That was the path to become a sage that was jointly opened up by the 800 sages in the Tianyuan world. Once a cultivator became a Tao master, he would be able to step onto that path and continue to move forward along that path. Then, he would go through all kinds of mysteries and tests contained in that path. He would comprehend all kinds of mysteries of cultivation and the secrets of the saint realm. Finally, he would break through and step into the supreme saint realm and become a supreme saint. Obviously, there was a huge difference between this method and becoming a pseudo-sage with the help of magic treasures. In the Earth universe, this method of breaking through with the help of magic treasures was a traceable method. As for the way to become a saint, it was so illusory and so difficult to grasp. In comparison, the difficulty of stepping on the path of sainthood to reach the saint realm was much greater than using magic treasures to break through. It was even more difficult to break through. If one wanted to have a better chance of breaking through, one should normally choose the method of breaking through with the help of magic treasures in the Earth universe. However, this was a normal choice. In Luo Fan's heart, there was a kind of hesitation, a kind of doubt. Breaking through with the help of magic treasures seemed so smooth. The process of breaking through step by step was so obvious. As long as one had enough time and collected enough materials, he would definitely be able to break through and finally become a pseudo-sage of level 9. However, there was a hidden worry in Luo Fan's heart. That was, would there really be a chance to become a sage by using this method to break through and become a pseudo-sage of level 9? Even if there was a chance to become a sage, would there really be no hidden dangers in the sage realm? The more he thought about it, the more doubtful he became. In the Earth universe, according to his current understanding, the most worthy sages were only the 7 sages in the Earth universe. As for the rest, although Luo Fan did not know much about the 54 saints in the Devil realm, he only knew about them. There was a gap between them and the 7 great sages of the Earth universe. Moreover, they seemed to be restricted by some matters that he did not understand. The Earth universe had existed for an extremely long period of time. It could even be described in terms of trillions or trillions. In such a long period of time, the 7 great sages of the Earth universe would accept a batch of disciples every tens of billions of years, or even hundreds of billions of years. The number of disciples they had accepted might even be counted in the hundreds of millions. Such a large number of disciples of the sages were nurtured by the 7 sages and received the best cultivation conditions in the world. It was even possible that most of them would eventually become level 9 pseudo-sages. However, despite the large number of disciples under the tutelage of the sages, not a single one of them was able to become a true sage. This did not increase the number of true sages in the universe on Earth without any hidden dangers. It was obviously impossible for Luo Fan to unreservedly believe in this method of attaining Tao and becoming a sage. However, it was different from the Earth universe. The situation in the Great Tianyuan world was completely different from that of the Earth universe. In the Great Tianyuan world, there were a total of 800 sages. Moreover, as far as Luo Fan knew, these sages were genuine and had no hidden dangers. They even felt that they were more wonderful existences than the 7 great sages of the Earth universe. According to legend, not long ago, perhaps only hundreds of millions of years ago, there was even a new sage born. Compared to the Earth universe, one could imagine how big the difference was. Therefore, naturally, one could know that compared to the method of breaking through realms with the help of magic treasures in the Great Tianyuan world, although the path to becoming a sage in the Great Tianyuan world was more illusory and difficult to grasp, it was also more reliable. In the end, the success rate of attaining Tao and becoming a sage was much higher. After thinking this through, Luo Fan finally made up his mind. Although there was no path to becoming a sage in the Earth universe that he could follow and eventually become a sage, he would never choose a path with obvious hidden dangers that would obviously make it difficult for him to eventually become a supreme sage. In other words, he would never be like those half-step fake sages in the Earth universe and use magic treasures to break through this realm. Although there is no path to becoming a sage, I have a huge advantage compared to the cultivators of the Earth universe. That is, I have my own independent worldview. This advantage is enough for me to make the impossible possible and achieve a breakthrough without the help of any external objects. Luo Fan thought to himself and could not help but reveal a faint smile on his face. After thinking this through, he suddenly felt his mind become clear. It was as if the shadow that had been covering his heart had completely disappeared. In a trance, he found that he was much closer to the lowest step. It seemed that he was getting closer to actually stepping on that step. Regarding such an unexpected surprise, Luo Fan was naturally happy. He carefully felt the changes in his body and mind. All kinds of strange fluctuations began to slowly emanate from the depths of his body and began to slowly infiltrate his body, constantly cleansing both inside and outside of his body. Gradually, his aura began to break through the barrier of the robe on the surface of his body and began to gradually disperse. Although only a little of this aura was revealed, its essence was slowly improving. It gradually broke through his original realm and faintly added a feeling that the Tao Master realm could not have. With the washing of the strange fluctuations, not only did Luo Fan's aura change, but also his body, his perception, his mind, his strength, and everything else. A few days later, the fluctuations completely subsided. At this time, the changes in his body had completely stabilized. Although he was isolated by the robe that could isolate the inside and outside of his body, all kinds of mysteries were still revealed. At this time, if a living creature could see the image of Luo Fan, there would naturally be a brand in the depths of his soul. However, it was no longer the brand of the Tao Master, but a brand that had surpassed the Tao Master realm, but had not reached the pseudo-saint realm. A brand of the half-step pseudo-saint realm. Such a brand contained all the cultivation achievements of Luo Fan at this moment. It contained all the mysteries of cultivation that he had comprehended and all the mysteries that could enable any ordinary living creature to become a powerful half-step pseudo-saint like Luo Fan from scratch. The moment Luo Fan opened his eyes, he found the changes in his body and could not help but sigh. What he had done in the past few days was the same as what he had done in the universe that was originally a technological civilization, but had been forcibly turned into a normal universe by Luo Fan. He had completely integrated all his cultivation achievements with his body, divine soul, Dharma power, Tao fruit, and so on. The reason why there was an extra step was because. However, it was because his cultivation realm had increased and he had become a half-step false sage. But his body, his dharma power, his Tao fruit, and so on were still at the level of the exceptional Tao master. This was clearly not compatible with his own cultivation. So, he needed to fuse with it once more in order to return to his previous flawless state. And now, the reason why the robe on his body was unable to conceal his aura after he had completely fused all of his cultivation achievements with his body. The reason for completely blocking out all the mysteries contained in his image was very simple. It was because his cultivation realm had increased. The various mysteries that he revealed at all times had greatly increased, surpassing the limits of the rune structure that was like a long robe. Helpless, Luo Fan could only try his best to restrain his aura and all the mysteries on his body. Although he was the one who had created this rune structure, it was not something that could be easily comprehended. However, he did not have any way to enhance the runic structure's power, because the runic structure's power had already reached its limit in its current state. No matter how well Luo Fan understood the structure, he could not continue to enhance the power of the rune structure to a level that was compatible with his current cultivation realm by modifying the rune structure. Unless he could enhance the power of the Royal Master Seal in accordance with the rules of the demon realm, just like how he expanded the country. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to enhance the power of the rune structure at all. Under such circumstances, the only thing that Luo Fan could do was to try his best to conceal his aura and the mysteries attached to his image to prevent others from forming a half-step false sage brand when they saw him. With Luo Fan's current strength, it was impossible for him to completely conceal his aura. Of course, it was impossible. However, by combining the power of the rune structure, he could make it take a long time for others to form an unstable, broken mark of a half-step pseudo-holiness after seeing him. Although it was not as effective as complete isolation, but it barely met Luo Fan's requirements. Looks like I'll have to find a way to improve the structure of this rune. Otherwise, when my cultivation level increases in the future, wouldn't I become a big bully? Luo Fan sighed. According to Luo Fan's calculation, he did not need to improve his cultivation realm too much. As long as he really stepped on the 9 steps and truly became a false sage, it was very likely that he would completely break through the barrier of the rune and reach the point where no matter how he restrained himself, it would be impossible for others to not be able to get his mark. Such a fact made him feel an indescribable sense of urgency. Of course, although he was worried about such a state, Luo Fan would not change his cultivation because of it. He would not give up on making a breakthrough because of it, nor would he not integrate all his cultivation achievements into his body after making a breakthrough so that he could reach a flawless state. This was because for him, his own cultivation and his own progress were the most important. Even if he became a big light bulb, even if any living being that saw him might have a mark that belonged to him, and even if it would bring him a lot of trouble, he would never change his cultivation method because he was afraid of these troubles. Although he had quickly restrained himself, Luo Fan still felt that there were countless living beings that had condensed a half-step pseudo-holiness mark in the depths of his soul. Luo Fan looked up and could not help but smile bitterly. The living beings that had condensed a half-step pseudo-holiness mark in the depths of his soul were none other than some powerful living beings that had evolved from the aura of heaven and earth and were born in the countless worlds and space-times. These space-times were between reality and illusion. So the living beings that were born in these space-times were naturally between reality and illusion. This form of existence, although there were some differences from living beings that existed in the form of flesh and blood, they already had the characteristics of almost all living beings. It was very normal for those powerful living beings that could receive the mysteries contained in Luo Fan and condense a half-step pseudo-holiness mark in the depths of their soul. As for these creatures, Luo Fan could only sigh and ignore them. They had obtained the mark of a half-step pseudo-sage. Although they could grow at a faster speed, in the future, they might break through the state between the real and the illusory and truly become real creatures that would appear in this space-time that had already become the second law realm. However, it had no effect on Luo Fan, nor would it pose any threat to him. Naturally, he was too lazy to care about them. With a slight thought, Luo Fan's eyes penetrated the layers of space-times. He directly broke through this world. Outside the space-time was not a special place that Luo Fan had never seen before, nor was it the Earth's universe, nor was it the demon realm. Instead, it was a place that Luo Fan was extremely familiar with. It was the gap between the world and the state of chaos. Within it, there was an endless amount of them. They were indescribably gray existences that had been contaminated by the state of chaos and carried the aura of chaos. Outside the gap between the world and the state of chaos was a state of chaos where anyone who was not a sage would be completely assimilated and then die. All traces of existence would be completely erased. This situation was exactly the same as what Luo Fan had sensed in the Earth's universe. If he didn't know about it, it would be impossible. He even thought that this space-time was also a perfect world that appeared directly in the state of chaos and could withstand the erosion and assimilation of the state of chaos. As expected, Luo Fan sensed that there was no time, no space, no matter, no energy, but there seemed to be everything. Everything was an endless state of chaos. He sensed the infinite principles that were even more profound and mysterious than the way of the sage, which were attacking his soul. This was what he thought. Although he had not confirmed the situation in front of him before, he could roughly guess it. This space-time was just a sector. Although it was much more stable and wonderful than the average sector, it was still a sector. In terms of level, it was still one level lower than the real perfect world. Of course, it could not directly appear in the state of chaos. Its existence, of course, could only be attached to a perfect world like the Earth's universe. As for a space-time attached to the Earth's universe, in Luo Fan's senses, it was like the Earth's universe and directly came into contact with the state of chaos. The reason for this was very simple. That was, Luo Fan did not understand how this world was attached to the Earth's universe. Cultivation was an extremely idealistic existence. In particular, after sorting out one's own independent and unique worldview, cultivation became even more idealistic. This was very easy to understand. After sorting out one's worldview, the world that one saw would be reorganized and changed according to one's worldview. Was this not idealistic? Since cultivation was based on one's mind, the things that a cultivator could see were only things that they knew. For example, the cultivators in the Earth's universe did not know that there was a gap between the world and the state of chaos. Therefore, no matter how powerful they were, they could not sense the gap between the world and the state of chaos. For them, after their perception could break through the world, they could directly sense the state of chaos. The gap between the state of chaos and the world did not exist for them at all, and they did not need to waste their power or perception to cross it. Unlike them, Luo Fan knew about the existence of the gap. Therefore, after his perception could break through the world, the first layer that he sensed was the gap between the world and the state of chaos. Only after breaking through the barrier of this gap could he sense the boundless and inconceivable state of chaos. Luo Fan's current state was similar to this reality. It was just that his current position was the position of a cultivator from the Earth universe in reality. In other words, because he did not know where this world was, he did not know in what form this world was attached to the Earth and the universe. He did not know what was separated from this world, how many layers separated it to be a gap between the heavens and the earth, and what was the state of chaos. Therefore, in his perception, these things did not exist at all. He felt as if he had directly transcended the unknown beyond the heavens and the earth. He had transcended countless layers of strange existences and reached the gap between the heavens and earth and the state of chaos. It seemed as if beyond the heavens and earth was the gap between the heavens and earth and the state of chaos, and beyond that was the boundless state of chaos. This was a rather helpless situation for Luo Fan. However, since his perception had not reached that level, he could not think of anything else. At this time, he could only put this dilemma aside and focus his attention on the state of chaos, which contained even more profound mysteries than the way of the sage, and carefully comprehend the infinite principles contained within. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please read it at MT. Chapter 1244. Luo Fan, who was focused on comprehending the mysteries of the state of chaos, could not feel the passage of time. After all, in the state of chaos, even time had yet to take shape and stabilize. How could there be any concept of the passage of time? Not knowing how much time had passed, it seemed like only a moment, but it also seemed like tens of thousands of years. Luo Fan was suddenly touched by an inexplicable feeling. It was a feeling that something was touching the world that he was currently in. Luo Fan came back to his senses and instantly knew that he had spent more than half a month in comprehending the mysteries of the state of chaos. In this half a month, he had been comprehending the mysteries contained in the state of chaos at all times. He was constantly receiving the inspiration contained within, which was beneficial to the improvement of his cultivation. However, when he wanted to search for it seriously and think about what he had gained and what he had improved, he could not find it at all. It was as if what he had gained was something that he could not understand at this moment. However, although he could not feel what he had gained, he could feel that his cultivation realm was a little closer to the 9th step. It's a long process. Luo Fan sighed. Although he was not very satisfied with such a gain, he knew that it was almost certain. After all, his cultivation realm was only half-step pseudo-sage. He was still extremely far away from being able to truly understand the state of chaos and truly comprehend the state of chaos. Even if he could sense the state of chaos, it was difficult for him to truly comprehend what he could understand from it. It was already very rare for him to have such a gain that he could not feel but was actually there. If he wanted to speed up, he could forget about it. With a thought, the void in front of him shook slightly. Then, a flight of stairs appeared in front of him. The first step was still in this space-time. From the second step onwards, it had already left this space-time and directly entered the void, extending out of this world. Just like that, it spread out step by step until it reached the 9th step. The staircase entered another space-time. It had a neutral and peaceful aura, but it contained an aura of annihilation. The aura came from where the staircase entered. Luo Fan stepped onto the flight of stairs. After a few steps, he reached the end of the flight of stairs. In other words, he had returned to the bottom of the sea in the demon realm. Over here, at that moment, a woman was standing on a platform filled with countless runes. Her hands shone brightly, as if there were countless runes condensing there. Luo Fan was familiar with this woman. She was the master of Wuyin Monastery. Look at you guys. This month must have been quite exciting. Luo Fan looked at the master of Wuyin Monastery and said with a smile. The temple master of Wuyin Monastery was preparing to open the space-time tunnel that connected to the Azure Mystic realm like last time. Suddenly, she realized that an ordinary-looking staircase had suddenly appeared out of thin air. Then, she saw Luo Fan casually walking up the staircase to stand in front of her. She couldn't help but show a shocked expression on her face. Such a technique was so exquisite that she didn't even dare to think about it. One must know that this was a completely different space-time. This cultivator was actually able to set up an ordinary staircase between two space-time in such a relaxed manner. Moreover, during the process, it didn't even cause any fluctuations in space-time, nor did it cause any changes in the nomological layer. This was simply subverting her understanding. How could she not be shocked? How could she not feel that it was unimaginable? At that moment, the master of Wuyin Monastery suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of relief. She was glad that she had made a prompt decision to make a deal with Luo Fan. When she heard what Luo Fan said, she couldn't help but smile bitterly and said, "You are right." It was quite exciting. Right now, the Savage Beast spiritual array has already been split into 3, and the entire island has already fallen into a state of chaos. When Luo Fan heard this, he nodded in realization. Just now, he knew that the master of Wuyin Monastery had a rather exciting time in the past month. It was because at that moment, the master of Wuyin Monastery had a kind of calamity aura that he didn't have the last time he saw her in this demon realm. As long as there was a killing calamity that caused a certain number of living beings to die because of it, the person would definitely have this kind of calamity aura. However, the calamity aura on the master of Wuyin Monastery was obviously produced when a shocking number of living beings died because of it. With so many living beings dying because of it, one could imagine how exciting the master of Wuyin Monastery had been in the past half a month. Although the master of Wuyin Monastery had only said a few words and didn't describe in detail what happened on the island in the past month, Luo Fan could roughly guess how intense the battle between the Green Temple, Wuyin Monastery, and the Yin God Society was in the past month based on what he had sensed from the calamity aura on the master of Wuyin Monastery. It was even possible that the master of Wuyin Monastery appeared here first, because she had obtained this opportunity after exchanging many benefits with the Yin God Society. The reason behind this was not difficult to guess. One should know that the master of Wuyin Monastery appeared here first. It meant that the Wuyin Monastery might upgrade their half-step pseudo-sage treasure to the true pseudo-sage level in a shorter time. It meant that the Wuyin Monastery might be far more powerful than the Yin God Society for a period of time. In this way, it was obvious that it was a great danger to the Yin God Society. A slight mistake could cause the Yin God Society to die a terrible death. Without sufficient benefits, how could the Yin God Society let go of the opportunity to come here first? As for the order of arrival, it was the master of Wuyin Monastery who made the deal with Luo Fan first, and the Yin God Society's master who made the deal later. In the face of such benefits, it was just a joke. However, Luo Fan couldn't be bothered about the specific benefits. He nodded and said, "Shall we set off now?" "If it's convenient for you," the master of Wuyin Monastery said happily. To her, it was naturally better to complete the task of extracting the 5 complete nomological networks as soon as possible. In her opinion, it would be perfect if they set off a month ago, let alone now. Luo Fan smiled and moved his heart. The staircase that extended from the space-time of the second nomological world shook slightly and disappeared without a trace. At the same time, he glanced around, and the space-time tunnel that extended from the bottom of the sea to the space-time collapsed at the same time. As the space-time tunnel collapsed, the whirlpool that appeared at the bottom of the sea also disappeared at the same time, as if it had never appeared. The master of Wuyin Monastery knew what Luo Fan meant when she saw his reaction. He just smiled and said goodbye to Luo Fan. Then, his figure turned into a faintly discernible rainbow that seemed to contain all colors, but at the same time, it seemed to be no color at all. He directly soared into the sky. Then, she dashed toward the northwest. Luo Fan took a light step and arrived on the surface of the sea as light as a feather. After raising his Tao realm to the half-step pseudo-sage realm, his usage of the nomological laws of the demon realm had improved to another level. Crossing such a long distance in an instant was really a piece of cake for him. It was extremely natural. When he came to the surface of the sea, he looked up and saw that he was surrounded by the boundless sea. The island that he had stayed on before, which was the island occupied by the Azure Temple, the Yin God Society, and the Wuyin Monastery, was in the southwest. It was about a few billion miles away from where he was now. After confirming his location, Luo Fan flew up. He did not need to turn into a rainbow at all. He could easily keep up with the rainbow that the master of Wuyin Monastery had turned into. The master of Wuyin Monastery could not help but exclaim when she saw that Luo Fan could keep up with her so easily. Such a technique was much more powerful than what she knew. This made her even more confident about the success of this plan. They were extremely fast. In just a few breaths, they arrived at a place that was a few billion miles away from where they had started. There was a small island there. A small island that could only be called a reef. Luo Fan moved his heart and instantly sensed the situation inside and outside of the island clearly. He knew that there was a space-time tunnel and some defensive formations hidden on the island. Apart from that, there was nothing else. He was relieved and landed in the middle of the island with the master of Wuyin Monastery. There was a huge tree there. It looked very ordinary, but it was a rather huge coconut tree. The master of Wuyin Monastery and Luo Fan landed under the tree. This place hides the space-time tunnel that leads to the five worlds. The master of the Wuyin Monastery explained. She then raised her hand and shot out countless runes into the ordinary coconut tree that seemed to be much bigger than usual. As the runes shot in, the 5 coconuts that were hanging on the coconut tree detached from the coconut tree. They transformed into countless runes in the void and formed a 5-colored light shield. It descended from the sky and shrouded the small island, surrounding the island in the middle. As the 5-colored light shield shrouded the island, everything within the light shield seemed to have become illusory and non-existent. From afar, it seemed like the sea was completely empty. There were no islands at all. That's a pretty good defense. Luo Fan couldn't help but smile when he saw this. The changes to the island were actually not just concealed by the light shield. Instead, it was an extremely wonderful method of folding space-time. After the light shield shrouded the island, the space-time of the island was like a piece of white paper that was twisted into a small ball. Then, the rest of it was flattened out. In other words, although this place was still in the demon realm, it had actually been twisted in all directions. The surroundings were directly connected and bypassed this place. As a result, this small island became a place that ordinary cultivators couldn't detect. In this way, unless one knew the exact method, it would be impossible to find the existence of this small island, even if they searched for countless years. This was an ingenious method that Luo Fan had never used before. It was no wonder that Luo Fan praised it for being so ingenious. Hearing Luo Fan's praise, the master of the Temple of Wuyin was quite happy. She humbly said something and sent out runes again. However, this time, the runes were not sent into the big tree in front of them. Instead, they were sent into the island under their feet. The runes that were sent out this time were tens of thousands of times more than the runes that were sent into the big tree previously. The temple master of Wuyin Monastery only finished inscribing all the runes after the time it took to brew a cup of tea. As the runes entered the island shook violently. Then, the entire terrain changed continuously. A stone door slowly protruded from the ground. In the end, it formed in front of the two of them. There were countless complicated runes carved on it. The stone door that was 30 feet tall appeared. The stone door was tightly shut. On top of the door, a strange wave was being emitted. It was like a tidal wave that kept reverberating above the island and changing continuously. This wave was very mysterious. As the wave swept past, Luo Fan felt as if his body was being cleansed by some kind of strange existence. His body and mind felt slightly relaxed. Back then, our ancestor discovered that this island was emitting this kind of wave. After some research, he discovered that there's a space-time tunnel that leads to the 5 worlds. The master of the Temple of Wuyin noticed that Luo Fan had a slightly relaxed expression on his face. She smiled and explained, "This is indeed a great opportunity. These 5 worlds are probably even more powerful than the Azure Mystery Realm of the Azure Temple. If we were to extract their nomological network and integrate it into a magic treasure, the power of the magic treasure would probably be much stronger than the one in the Azure Temple." Luo Fan exclaimed, "Even so, it would be even more difficult to extract the nomological network completely. I would need you to do it." The master of the Temple of Wuyin smiled embarrassedly. Luo Fan only smiled and said, "If I can do it, I will naturally do it." The master of the Temple of Wuyin smiled sweetly. She raised her hand and pushed the door. The door let out a creaking sound. Then, the wave that was like a tidal wave that reverberated in the island became stronger and more obvious. When the door was completely opened, the wave had even condensed into a physical form. It was like a wave of water that permeated the interior of the island that was covered by the 5-colored light barrier. After the door was opened, what was behind the door was not what Luo Fan had expected. It was a colorful space-time tunnel. Instead, it was a very strange scene. It was a scene that Luo Fan had never imagined. It was a strange void. In this void, there were 5 extremely strange things that seemed to be constantly changing their forms. The strange things that seemed to change their forms billions of times every second were floating in the void. The entire void was not the kind of void that existed under the nomological law layer in normal space-time. In fact, it was even more intense than that kind of void. It was a kind of void that was thousands of times more illusory. Even thoughts that entered this void would be assimilated into nothingness and turned into an illusion. Are these the five worlds? Luo Fan looked at the door in shock and said, "That's right. Although our ancestors have not been able to extract the nomological network of the five worlds completely, they have created a place that reflects the existence of the five worlds. This way, the five worlds that were originally unobservable can be seen easily with the naked eye. We hope that we can comprehend how the five worlds interact with each other and achieve the goal of completely bypassing their interactions," the master of the Temple of Wuwen said proudly and helplessly. She was naturally proud of the fact that her ancestors were able to do such an unbelievable thing. They had created such a strange void that reflected the five worlds and made the five worlds easily visible to the naked eye. However, she was helpless because although they had achieved this step, they still could not find a way to extract the nomological network of the five worlds completely. They even needed the help of outsiders to achieve this step. How could she be helpless about this? After listening to the explanation of the master of the Temple of Wuwen, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. He understood the true appearance of this strange void based on this hint. This place wasn't really a void. It was a state, an illusory state. This state did not exist in all space-time, in all worlds, or in the gaps between worlds. Strictly speaking, it was just an abstract definition. This definition was formless and intangible, and it was impossible for it to contain any laws of nature. It was impossible for it to contain any matter or energy. It was even impossible for it to contain space and time. The basis of its existence was purely to contain the reflections of the five worlds. It was precisely because of this that this place seemed so empty. It was even more empty than all the nothingness that Luo Fan had seen. It did not even exist, so how could it not be empty? In other words, this strange void had only appeared because of the five worlds. It was because of the five worlds that such a void existed. It was not because of the existence of the five worlds in this void. As he thought about this, the scene in front of Luo Fan changed instantly. It turned out that the five worlds that seemed to be extremely far away and looked like five stars in the night sky instantly expanded by many times. Behind the door, they formed the size of five suns. The various changes above the five worlds that were originally blurry became extremely clear. Chapter 1245. Luo Fan took a step forward and his figure directly crashed into the strange nothingness. The nothingness was an abstract conceptual existence. When Luo Fan stepped into it, he did not need to pass through the nothingness at all. His figure directly appeared in the space-time. It was the space-time he wanted to step into, the world he wanted to enter just now. The five worlds were combined together in an extremely complicated and mysterious way, forming an extremely complete existence. Naturally, there could not be only one center, nor could there only be one core. The world that Luo Fan had entered could be said to be the core of the system of the five worlds. It could also be said to be the edge. This world, at first glance, looked no different from a normal world. There were all kinds of terrains and all kinds of living creatures. There were even quite a number of cultivators. However, if one carefully sensed it, one would find something special about this world. The structure of the rules and laws of this world was completely different from all the rules and laws of the world that Luo Fan had seen in the past. The rules and laws of this world had a certain bias, and it was vaguely connected to a certain location. It could borrow some kind of external power. The bias of the rules and laws of this world made the space-time have a certain fantasy quality, so that ordinary people could use some simple methods to materialize the things in their imagination. Similarly, it also made the space-time. The cultivation system of this world was biased towards the direction of using fantasy. forming a kind of cultivation method that was quite shallow for Luo Fan, but also had many mysterious and strange. Luo Fan carefully sensed and soon found the source of the strange fluctuation that he had sensed outside the space-time gate. Under the strange rules and laws of the space-time, the power of the entire space-time was undergoing a very subtle vibration. The vibration itself was extremely weak, but the penetrating power was extremely strong. It could easily penetrate through and combine with some of the wonderful existences in the outside world, forming some kind of change. In the end, it formed a fluctuation that had a very strong effect on cultivators, and it constantly affected everything on the small island. All living creatures. 5 skandhas. They were the 5 skandhas of form, perception, thought, action, and consciousness. Among them, color referred to matter. Color refers to the aggregation of all objective substances with form and quality, which is equivalent to what people now call material phenomena. Specifically, it included the 4 great origins of earth, water, fire, and wind. The 4 great emptiness referred to the 4 great receiving essence. It refers to the feelings or emotions that arise when the senses come into contact with foreign objects. Want to accumulate. Perception and representation derive from the analysis of sensations arising from the acceptance of external objects. Xingyun, the will to act through the understanding of the external world. Knowledge accumulation mainly referred to the function of the consciousness of living beings. For example, distinguishing and recognizing things according to the situation in the space-time. Obviously, it was the space-time corresponding to the skandha of the 5 skandhas. The other 4 space-times naturally corresponded to the other 4 skandhas. If that wasn't the case, the strange ripples from this space-time wouldn't have combined with the strange ripples from the other 4 space-time to form such a miraculous change, giving the ripples such a miraculous effect. At this moment, Luo Fan was already a perfect half-step pseudo-sage. His strength was more than twice as strong as before. He could completely grasp everything in a certain space-time after staying in it for a period of time. He could be almost omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient. His power was close to that of a sage, but it was also much stronger than before. Of course, this strength naturally wasn't because his strength had increased after becoming a sage. Instead, it was because the time he needed to stay in that space-time was much shorter than before. In other words, it might have taken him a few hours to be almost omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient in this space-time. But now, he only needed a few minutes to achieve that. Behind Luo Fan, the master of the Wuhan monastery didn't wait outside. Instead, she followed behind Luo Fan and directly stepped into this world. After all, the 5 space-time had been controlled by the Wuhan monastery for a long time. Therefore, although the master of the Wuhan monastery couldn't easily step into this space-time like Luo Fan, there weren't many obstacles for her to enter this space-time. A few breaths after Luo Fan entered this space-time, she bypassed all the obstacles and appeared next to Luo Fan. At this moment, the master of the Wuhan monastery was still extremely shocked. It turned out that she had already overestimated Luo Fan's strength. However, whenever Luo Fan performed some tricks, she realized that she knew too little about Luo Fan and that she had underestimated Luo Fan. Just like now, if she wasn't the master of Wuhan Monastery, if it wasn't for the fact that her seniors in the sect had not passed down the method of entry and exit, if it wasn't for the fact that she had studied the 5 spaces and the 5 worlds for a long time, she would have to spend at least a few years to deduce the way to enter this world. However, Luo Fan, who was in front of him, had only taken a glance at the nothingness and the 5 space-times before a look of realization appeared on his face. Then, without needing his guidance, he had directly entered one of the 5 space-times in a much calmer manner. How unbelievable was that? How shocking was that? However, the master of the Wuhan monastery calmed down when she thought that this person might be a fake sage who had ascended several levels. Luo Fan didn't care about the master of the Wuhan monastery. He walked in this space-time and spent 2 hours measuring every area of this space-time with his feet. He was waiting for himself to become omniscient, omniscient, and omnipotent in this space-time. At the same time, he took the opportunity to observe the various special mysteries of this space-time. This space-time was extremely vast, almost boundless. Even though Luo Fan's walking speed was beyond imagination, crossing the entire space-time in just a few quarters of an hour, there was not much time left. By the time he felt that he had already reached his goal, to be omniscient, and omnipotent in this space-time was just barely enough for him to travel across this space-time. The master of the Wuhan monastery didn't know what Luo Fan was doing, but she didn't dare to disturb him. She just followed behind him carefully. As he measured the entire space-time in an extremely strange way, she observed everything in this world that she had seen countless times. In her opinion, Luo Fan was so unfathomable that she couldn't see any difference between a few minutes ago and a few minutes later. At most, she could only see Luo Fan's frown. But now his frown was relaxed. However, although she could tell that there was a change in Luo Fan's mood, the master of the Wuhan monastery didn't dare to disturb him. Although she was curious, in comparison, she was more concerned about extracting the complete nomological network of the 5 sets of rules. She wanted to elevate that magic treasure to the true quasi-sage level. The master of the Wuhan monastery didn't dare to disturb him. Luo Fan wasn't in the mood to care about the master of the Wuhan monastery either. With a thought, he took a step forward and disappeared from the space-time. When he reappeared, he was already in the space-time corresponding to the consciousness. The master of the Wuhan monastery was thinking about what Luo Fan was going to do. Suddenly, she realized that there was nothing in front of her, and Luo Fan had disappeared. She couldn't help but be shocked. She sensed again and realized that Luo Fan had appeared in another space-time. She couldn't help but exclaim. Even she didn't have the ability to move between the 5 space-times directly. Although she had the method to enter and exit, she still needed to use the demon realm as a transit if she wanted to move between the 5 space-times. In other words, she had to move from this space-time to the outside of the stone door in the demon realm. Then, she would use the same method as before to enter another space-time from the outside of the stone door. How could she be like Luo Fan, who could step into another space-time from this space-time so easily? What I sensed earlier was indeed correct. The more I look, the more I realize that I've underestimated him. The master of the Wuhan monastery sighed. She used her own method to transit a few times. After spending a lot of effort, she finally moved to the space-time corresponding to the consciousness that Luo Fan was in after tens of breaths. The space-time corresponding to the consciousness was not much different from the space-time corresponding to the consciousness. On the surface, it looked like a normal world. However, if one took a closer look, one would realize that the law layer had a strange tendency. This tendency caused the cultivation system of the cultivator in this space-time to be different from the corresponding space-time corresponding to the consciousness. It was a cultivation willpower and a cultivation system that enhanced the ability to create. Luo Fan's method was similar to the previous one. He walked casually in the space-time and spent a few minutes walking around the entire space-time. After a few minutes, he felt that he could also achieve the state of omniscience, and even omnipotence in this space-time. He took a step forward and stepped into the 3rd space-time. After another few minutes, he walked out of the 3rd space-time and stepped into the 4th space-time. After another few minutes, he arrived at the 5th space-time. In just a short period of 4 to 6 hours, he'd become omniscient, omnipotent, and even omnipotent in this boundless expanse of space. After completing this process, Luo Fan lifted his foot and took a step forward. He appeared on the small island in the demon realm and in front of the stone door that was 30 feet tall. After a while, the master of the Wuhan monastery hurriedly constructed a passage and rushed out of the last space-time. She appeared next to Luo Fan. I'm confident that I can extract the law network of laws from these 5 space-times, Luo Fan said to the master of the Wuhan monastery calmly. The master of the Wuhan monastery couldn't help but be shocked and delighted when he heard that. What shocked him the most was that after Luo Fan had easily walked through these 5 spaces in just 4 to 6 hours, he still couldn't see what he had done. Suddenly, He had the confidence to completely extract the 5 complete networks of laws that the elders of his sect hadn't been able to extract for hundreds of millions of years. She was delighted that Luo Fan was able to do this. Didn't that mean that the treasure of the Wuhan monastery that was half a step to the pseudo-sage level would soon be upgraded to the pseudo-sage level, and her cultivation realm would also be upgraded to the pseudo-sage level? Under such shock and delight, the master of the Wuhan monastery couldn't maintain her composure anymore. She said with a trembling voice, "I'll leave it to you then. This is the fragment of the treasure. Please accept it." As she spoke, the power in her body surged, and an extremely strange substance floated out of her body. It was a strange substance. This strange substance looked like an ordinary stone that was several feet in size. However, it was filled with an extremely strange aura. It was an indescribable aura. It was as if its existence alone could make people fall into an extremely strange state. It was an aura that was completely separated from reality and reality. No wonder it's a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. As soon as Luo Fan saw it, he instantly determined that it was a fragment of a magic treasure. Moreover, it was a fragment of a level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure. It was a fragment of a treasure. Although it was different from the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure fragments that he had seen before, it was extremely similar in nature. But in essence, they were extremely similar. In other words, they were on the same level. The pressure it exerted on him was the same. Such an existence, if it wasn't the real one, a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure fragment. However, he refused to believe it no matter what. As for the aura that this treasure fragment exuded, it could even completely pull people out of the real world and the real world. He also knew very well that it was the aura that could be produced when the Wuhan nunnery's cultivation method was upgraded to the peak. All right, this is indeed the fragment I need. Luo Fan smiled. As he spoke, he raised his hand and waved. The huge magic treasure fragment left the abyss of Wuhan Monastery's grasp and landed gently in his hand. During this process, it shrank rapidly until it was the size of a fist. He held it gently in his hand. After holding the treasure fragment, a strange wave was emitted from it and continuously blasted into his body. It shook his entire body and made him shiver uncontrollably. Still trying to resist? Luo Fan frowned. With a thought, he drew out a wave of power from the heaven and earth in his sleeve heaven and earth cauldron and blasted it into the treasure fragment through his body. In an instant, there was a loud crack. It was as if the sky had been split open and the earth had been shattered. The sound came from the fragment of the artifact. Then, the wave that the treasure fragment blasted into Luo Fan's body disappeared instantly, as if it had never existed. The Wuhan nunnery's master stood there and watched Luo Fan's actions. She was so shocked that she could not imagine it. The power that Luo Fan drew out from the heaven and earth cauldron had only passed through his body and did not completely seep out of his body. Hence, the Wuhan nunnery's master did not sense that power directly. However, the moment that power flowed through Luo Fan's body, it slightly disrupted the balance in Luo Fan's body. This caused its aura to seep out of Luo Fan's body and allowed the Wuhan nunnery's master to sense its existence. At that moment, the Wuhan nunnery's master, who was affected by the aura, felt as if her entire body was enveloped by a terrifying power from the inside out. There was also a powerful destructive force brewing that wanted to completely destroy her body and completely erase her existence from the inside out. It was the first time in her life that she had experienced such a terrifying feeling. How could she not be shocked? As for Luo Fan, he had easily refined the fragment of the magic treasure. Under the impact of such a terrifying aura, it seemed very normal. Luo Fan did not care about the Wuyun monastery master. After refining the Dharma treasure fragment, he carefully understood the mysteries contained in the Dharma treasure fragment. Then, he smiled and kept the Dharma treasure fragment in his heaven and earth sleeve. This magic treasure fragment contained an extremely profound mystery, but now was not the time to comprehend it. All right, fellow Taoist, now that you've received your reward, I'll give it to you. In that case, let's not delay any further. Let's complete the transaction immediately, Luo Fan said with a faint smile. Sorry to trouble you. The abbess of Five Attentions Monastery suppressed the fear in her heart and said carefully. Luo Fan could tell that she was afraid. He thought for a while and understood what was going on. He smiled faintly and did not bother to care about her. He had no intention of comforting her. With a thought, he was about to extract the nomological rules of the 5 space-time layers at the same time. When the abbess of Five Attentions Monastery saw what he was doing, the joy in her heart finally suppressed the fear that had arisen in her heart. She looked forward to it. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly stopped, and the expression on his face became rather ugly. He slowly retracted his right hand that was about to grab forward. He slowly turned around and looked diagonally above him. He was looking at a spot outside the 5-colored light shield. The abbess of Five Attentions Monastery was shocked. She did not know what was wrong with Luo Fan. However, she had been in charge of this sect for hundreds of millions of years. At this time, he quickly thought of something, and his complexion turned deathly pale. His thoughts spread out and instantly fused with the island. With the help of the island's power, his own perception increased crazily, reaching a realm several times stronger than before. Then, he swept towards the location that Luo Fan was paying attention to. Clap, clap, clap. A soft clap came from the void. It penetrated the folding effect of the island and entered the ears of Luo Fan and the abbess of Five Attentions Monastery. Chapter 1246. The voice caused Luo Fan's face to turn pale. At the same time, the temple master of Wuan Temple was terrified. As expected of someone with that item. You've discovered me so quickly, said Chinfeng. Such a faint voice leisurely passed through the barrier of the folded space and directly entered the ears of Luo Fan and the abbess of Wuan Monastery. It was a man's voice. It contained some kind of effect that could change matter. Just by listening to this sound, Luo Fan and the temple master of Wuan Monastery felt as if the world around them was changing. This sound was like a heavenly sound that was naturally born between heaven and earth. Then, time and space shook and the space-fold effect disappeared without a trace, without any warning. The small island that had disappeared from the sea, as if it had completely disappeared from the demon realm, reappeared on the boundless sea in an instant. In the void above, a middle-aged man stood in the air. The man was skinny and his face was sallow. At that moment, he was looking down at Luo Fan and the temple master of Wuan Temple, who were on the island with a serious expression. I am Luo Fan. How should I address you? Senior? Why are you joking with us juniors? Luo Fan said. Just based on the means that this person had displayed, he was already much stronger than Luo Fan. Naturally, such an existence could only be called a senior. Joking? I never joke around. There is something on you that I need. Give it to me, the middle-aged man said calmly. Luo Fan frowned. This person's cultivation realm was extremely high. His strength was extremely shocking. Although he did not emit any aura at this moment, just the aura that he emitted was enough to make him feel a chill from the bottom of his heart. Such a powerful existence actually did not care about anything and directly opened his mouth to take something from him. This had truly caught him off guard. I don't understand what you were talking about, Senior, Luo Fan said calmly. The middle-aged man frowned and raised his hand to grab at Luo Fan. In an instant, Luo Fan felt that his body was wrapped by some kind of invisible and intangible strange existence, and an incomparably strong pressure was generated from all directions, crazily acting on both inside and outside of his body, making him feel as if his whole body was about to collapse. This invisible existence wasn't power. It wasn't a rule or a law. It wasn't even a space-time existence. It was a strange existence that was beyond Luo Fan's understanding and contained infinite power. The transmission of this kind of existence didn't seem to take any time at all, at the same time that the man was about to move. As soon as the man made his move, it had already taken effect on Luo Fan. Luo Fan didn't even have the time to think about resisting. I might need to remind you so that you will remember what it is, the man said. After saying that, he slightly tightened his right hand, and Luo Fan felt his whole body shake. The strange existence that had condensed his body into a whole suddenly disintegrated, and his whole body instantly scattered in all directions, turning into powder and disappearing without a trace. At this moment, Luo Fan knew that this wasn't the time to be reserved. With a slight thought, the power of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court instantly gushed out from his sleeve and directly poured into his body. In an instant, the strange existence that was about to disintegrate his body was repelled, and his body was restored to its original state. Then, the entire heavenly cauldron appeared above his head. A mysterious light surged out of the heavenly cauldron and seeped into his body like water. As the mysterious light seeped into his body like water, the feeling of being wrapped up by some strange existence and being unable to move instantly disappeared. At this moment, the middle-aged man's expression changed slightly. There was a sense of disbelief and an inexplicable joy. It really is this. What's your relationship with the Exalted One? Why do you have the refining method of his heavenly cauldron? The middle-aged man shouted coldly. At this moment, under the protection of the heavenly cauldron, Luo Fan could sense the strength of the man in front of him with the help of the power of the heavenly cauldron. This man was an extremely powerful pseudo-sage. Although he wasn't a 9th-level pseudo-sage like the Exalted One, he was still a pseudo-sage, which was only 1 level lower. He was tens of thousands of times stronger than Luo Fan at this moment. It's a pity that although this treasure is of the 9th-level pseudo-sage level, your strength is too weak. How much power can you exert with such a powerful magic treasure? And how long can you activate it for? The middle-aged man said faintly. He raised his hand and waved in the void. The nomological layer of the devil realm that had been integrated with the great Tao instantly produced countless complex and subtle changes. Under these subtle changes, Luo Fan felt that the heavenly cauldron above his head was about to break away from his control. This feeling was extremely strong and was becoming more and more intense. This made Luo Fan feel that he was about to lose control of the heavenly cauldron in the next moment. Luo Fan's expression changed slightly. He shouted softly, and the 5 worlds inside the stone gate each emitted a ray of light that penetrated the abstract nothingness and directly entered the heavenly cauldron. This completely destroyed the feeling that the heavenly cauldron was about to break away from his control. Next, the heavenly cauldron instantly emitted an intense ray of light. A powerful suction force appeared out of nowhere and directly grabbed the middle-aged man. Before he could react, the middle-aged man was directly pulled into the heavenly cauldron. The middle-aged man was a 9th-level pseudo-sage. There is no need to mention how powerful he was. Normally, he could completely destroy the space-time of a large part of the devil realm with a single thought. It was a piece of cake for him to defeat a pseudo-sage like Luo Fan, who was not much weaker than an ordinary 9th-level pseudo-sage. However, the situation had changed too quickly. Moreover, the power that the heavenly cauldron had unleashed had far exceeded his imagination. Therefore, he had been caught so easily by the heavenly cauldron due to a moment of carelessness. It should be noted that normally, if one's strength had not reached that level, it was impossible to perfectly activate the magic treasure of the corresponding level. For example, Ayin Divine General could only activate a pseudo-sage magic treasure for a very short period of time, and the strength that he could exert was greatly limited. This was only a half-step pseudo-sage-level magic treasure. Luo Fan was currently in possession of a level 9 pseudo-sage-level magic treasure. No matter how cautious one was, they would not have thought that he could exert the power of this magic treasure to the extent that it could affect a 9th-level pseudo-sage. Fortunately, this magic treasure was refined by me, and this place is connected to the 7 worlds. Otherwise, I would not have the ability to resist it all. Luo Fan thought. At this moment, the heavenly cauldron shook violently, and there was a vague feeling that it was about to be completely broken and collapsed. Luo Fan's expression changed slightly. He stepped forward lightly. He directly crashed into the door, and in the blink of an eye, he came to a world that he had been to before. Coming here, he was almost omnipotent and omniscient. The omniscient power was restored. With a slight thought, the power of the entire world gathered crazily. A very special change was formed around the heavenly cauldron, and a very strange formation was set up, directly strengthening the stability of the space-time by tens of thousands of times. It reached a point where it was thousands of times more stable than the demon realm. At this moment, Luo Fan's heavenly cauldron finally could not take it anymore. If he did not do something, it would completely collapse. Luo Fan had a thought. The heavenly cauldron fell, and a middle-aged man holding a square seal came out. After the middle-aged man came out, he looked around and frowned. This is my world. Now the entire world has been completely sealed by me. Unless you can kill me, don't even think about leaving this world, and don't even think about contacting the outside world. Luo Fan said. In this world, he could do almost everything close to a sage. Sealing the inside and outside was naturally a small problem. If it was not for the fact that the strength of this 9th-level pseudo-sage existence was too strong, exceeding the limits of this world, Luo Fan would only need a thought to seal him, or even kill him completely. The middle-aged man gave it a try, and a powerful thought rushed out of his body, wanting to rush out and contact the outside world. However, although these thoughts were crystal clear and almost turned into some kind of strange life, they could not break through the barrier of space-time at all. They could not even stir up some ripples in the void, let alone break through this world and return to the demon realm. Looks like I can only kill you. The middle-aged man tried and finally knew that what Luo Fan said was not a lie, but he still said indifferently, "Senior, if you have something to say, we can talk it out. Why we have to fight to the death as soon as we meet? Although I have the heavenly cauldron, the relationship between me and the venerated god is not like what you think." With the help of the 5 worlds, Luo Fan already had some confidence and was not as worried as he was in the demon realm. Of course, he was not that worried, but he was also not interested in fighting to the death with a 9th-level pseudo-sage, so he hoped to use words to dispel the 9th-level pseudo-sage hostility. The middle-aged man frowned and said, "You're just an ant. How dare you fight to the death with me?" As he said that, he raised his hand, and the fist-sized square seal in his hand floated up. It grew to 30 feet in the void and pressed down towards where Luo Fan was at a seemingly slow, but actually fast speed. As the square seal pressed down, Luo Fan felt that the entire world was shaking violently. The laws of the entire world were almost collapsing inch by inch. Even his blockade of space-time and the isolation effect of this world was shaken, as if it was about to collapse. The space-time that had been strengthened by countless times and was thousands of times more stable than the demon realm also produced countless cracks. It even outlined the innumerable runes engraved on the square seal and slammed towards Luo Fan one by one. Facing such a terrifying square seal, Luo Fan's expression did not change, but he raised his vigilance to a peak level. He raised his hand and pointed. The heavenly cauldron of the heavenly cauldron rumbled and spewed out a ray of divine light. The divine light contained countless worlds and heaven and earth. It condensed into a long river and headed straight for the square seal. After becoming a pseudo-sage, Luo Fan had already comprehended some of the mysteries of pseudo-sage. When he attacked, there was an extremely strong karmic effect. What was karmic effect? It was just a reason. He could determine the result without caring about the process in the middle. In terms of attacks, Luo Fan only needed to attack and think about where the attack was going to hit, and the attack would definitely hit. No matter where he wanted to hit, no matter how the existence that he wanted to hit dodged, it would definitely hit in the end. Of course, this was just an effect. There was never anything in the world that was invincible. However, this karmic effect was not unstoppable. As long as he was strong enough and his cultivation was high enough, he would be able to stop the attack before it reached the target. This made this attack with karmic effect useless. At this moment, Luo Fan used the attack of the heavenly cauldron of the heavenly cauldron of the heavenly cauldron to add karmic effect. The middle-aged man saw the long river formed by countless worlds and space-time. He felt the karmic effect contained within it. He couldn't help but show a look of surprise on his face. He let out a soft exclamation. The square seal turned and directly hit the front of a long river. A strange wave swept across the entire world, instantly wiping out all the living beings in this world. The terrain of this world was completely flattened, turning the continent into a flat piece of land that was flipped over. The surrounding sea was directly shaved off a thick layer that was dozens of miles deep. The long river formed by the divine light had completely disappeared. From the exit of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court to the point where it came into contact with the seal, everything had disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been there in the first place. Similar to the disappearance of the long river, the strange runes formed by the cracks in space-time that the square seal emitted also disappeared. Even the square seal returned to the hand of the level 8 pseudo-sage and lay there quietly. The middle-aged man looked around and said, "My name is Gonguzi. At least here, you have the right to talk to me as an equal." Hearing this, Luo Fan finally let out a sigh of relief. This man was quite powerful, and he had come with his original body. If he refused to stop and talk, Luo Fan would have no choice but to continue fighting with him. If that happened, it was very likely that the 5 worlds would be completely destroyed, and he could only gather the last of the world's power to control the heavenly cauldron to break through the space-time of the demon world and escape. If that was the case, it would obviously not go according to his plan. "So it's Senior Gonguzi. I am Luo Fan. Greetings." Luo Fan smiled and bowed. "There's no need to be so hypocritical. If you don't have the strength, I won't care even if you kneel down and call me father. If you have the strength, I won't care even if you call me a dog," Gonguzi said indifferently. Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel helpless. However, he wisely did not argue with Gonguzi. He asked carefully, "If I may be so bold as to ask, why did Senior come looking for me?" "Naturally, it's because of the treasure above your head," Gonguzi said indifferently. Gonguzi said indifferently, "In this world, there's only one person who possesses such a treasure, and that is the venerated one. I have a grudge against him, but I can't find him. Since you have delivered yourself to my doorstep, how can I let you go?" Gonguzi said. Hearing this, Luo Fan hurriedly said, "Senior, you misunderstand. I have no relationship with the venerated one. Even if we do have a relationship, we are enemies. I don't know where the venerated one is." Gonguzi frowned at Luo Fan and said, "Do you think I'm a fool?" When Luo Fan heard this, he knew what he meant. He could not help but sigh and said, "Of course not." Gonguzi looked at Luo Fan like he was looking at a fool and said, "Since I don't look like a fool, do you think I would believe a person who is holding a treasure of my enemy above his head saying that he is also an enemy of mine? Although this sounds ridiculous, it is the truth. Back then, I happened to obtain the refining method of such a treasure in what you call foreign world. After that, I accidentally alarmed the venerated one and fought with his projection clone. It wasn't easy for the venerated one to escape because his injuries hadn't healed yet." Luo Fan could only say this. The venerated one is a level 9 false saint. The refining method of his treasure is a secret among secrets. You think you can obtain it by chance in a foreign world? Even if you want to make up a lie, you have to make it more truthful. No matter how stupid I am, I won't believe such a lie, Gonguzi said. When Luo Fan heard this, he had no way to explain anymore. If he told Gonguzi everything that happened in the technological universe, he was afraid that Gonguzi would also say the same thing. This lie was much more convincing than before. The possibility of him believing it was still negligible. Then what does Senior want? Luo Fan had no choice but to ask. First, give me the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. Second, tell me how you can contact the venerated one. That's all Gonguzi said. Luo Fan's expression was bitter. Although I can do the first condition, I definitely won't do it. Senior is simply too much a threat to me. If I hand over the heavenly cauldron of the divine court, Senior can kill me with a single thought. For the sake of my life, I definitely can't hand over the treasure. As for the second condition, I don't even know how to contact the venerated one. So how can I tell Senior? Chapter 1247. At a time like this, Luo Fan could only smile helplessly. Gongguzi, Gongguzi. Sure enough, his stubbornness was beyond imagination. Perhaps cultivators with truly powerful cultivation realms were extremely stubborn. I really can't complete the second condition. Luo Fan sighed. Gongguzi's face was filled with dissatisfaction when he heard Luo Fan's words. This was very obvious. In his opinion, Luo Fan clearly had a close relationship with the righteous Venerate. Gongguzi also had a grudge against the righteous Venerate, so he could forcefully suppress his grudge and communicate with Luo Fan so that Luo Fan would let him go after revealing the righteous Venerate's location. He was so magnanimous, but this cultivator didn't know what was good for him and still wanted to hide it. How could he be satisfied? The righteous Venerate's methods are indeed incredible. To be able to nurture such a loyal cultivator. I originally didn't plan to use my full strength, but it seems that it's impossible now. Gongguzi sighed. Hearing this, Luo Fan frowned. He knew that the situation was bad and didn't dare to delay. He raised his hand and grabbed towards Gongguzi. In an instant, not only this world, but a majority of the powers of the 5 complementary worlds started to gather towards this location. An unparalleled power enveloped Gongguzi from all directions, turning into boundless lightning and thunder. It was unknown how many lightning creatures were formed, trying to drown Gongguzi. Even a level 3 or level 4 pseudo-sage would find it difficult to withstand such a ferocious attack. They would be directly turned into dust by this attack and turn into nothingness. However, it was obvious. At this moment, the one facing Luo Fan wasn't a level 3 or level 4 pseudo-sage, but a level 8 pseudo-sage. He was only a step away from level 9 pseudo-sage, and his strength was tens of thousands of times stronger than a level 3 or level 4 pseudo-sage. Such an existence only shook the square seal in its hand slightly in the face of these terrifying thunderbolts and astonishing lightning. A strange deterrence was emitted from the square seal. In an instant, all the thunderbolts and lightning became extremely gentle and obedient, turning into a light screen. It began to wrap around him. Of course, Luo Fan knew that these thunderbolts could not defeat Gongguzi. He didn't summon the lightning to completely defeat Gongguzi, but to increase the power of this world. This would greatly increase the power he could use, at least to the point where he could fight against Gongguzi. At this moment, Gongguzi had subdued the lightning bolts. He turned into a band of light and circled around his body. He was not surprised. The heavenly cauldron above his head trembled. Dusky light gushed out of the mouth of the cauldron, forming a strange world. In an instant, all the origin chi in this world was sucked away. All power, including the power around Gongguzi's body, was completely absorbed into the world. After obtaining this power, the world instantly skyrocketed, transforming from an illusory world into an extremely real existence. An existence that seemed to be the creator of the world was even born in that world. It was an existence that was more powerful than the level 9 pseudo-sage that Luo Fan had expected. This world had been completely flattened by the first wave of battle between Luo Fan and Gongguzi just now. All living creatures had disappeared, and all the undulating terrain had become flat again. At this moment, he had lost all of his power. However, the changes only caused the world to become deathly still and pitch black. Apart from that, there were no other abnormal effects. In this world, Luo Fan was like a saint. He was omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipotent. Although he could not directly target Gongguzi due to the difference in their levels of power and could not directly break through Gongguzi's defense to wipe him out, it was a simple matter for him to recapture the power that was under Gongguzi's control and even shift Gongguzi's position by creating various situations. Gongguzi originally controlled the endless lightning condensed by Luo Fan. He was just secretly laughing at Luo Fan's lack of understanding of the strength of a level 8 pseudo-sage and using such a crude method to defeat him. However, he suddenly found that the lightning that was under his control was completely out of his control in an instant. Then, it disappeared without a trace, along with all the power in the world. It was as if it had never existed in the first place. Even though he was a level 8 pseudo-sage, he could not help but be puzzled for an insignificant fraction of a second. He was slightly stunned for a millionth of a second, but it was enough for Luo Fan to display his means. In an instant, the world that was born with the power of the divine court heavenly cauldron was completed by almost all the power of the 5 worlds, and even gave birth to a powerful living being, expanded and shrank. Gong Guzi, a level 8 pseudo-sage, was directly thrown into that world. After Gong Guzi was thrown into that world, the existence in that world that was even more powerful than a level 9 pseudo-sage, which was like a god of creation, attacked Gong Guzi like a crazy demon. Gong Guzi could only use the various powers of his square seal to resist the attack of the god of creation. That world was evolved with the power of the divine court heavenly cauldron as a foundation. After being completely replenished by the power of the 5 worlds, the stability of its space and time had reached an unbelievable level. With the reinforcement of the god of creation, it withstood the aftermath of their battle. Although it was still shaking constantly, it was many times better than this world. There were no signs of it being destroyed at all. Seeing this, Luo Fan heaved a sigh of relief. He controlled the divine court heavenly cauldron to soar into the sky and suddenly pressed down in midair, suppressing the world under the cauldron. In an instant, the violently shaking world was stabilized, causing all the tremors and impacts of the world to be transmitted to the divine court heavenly cauldron. The divine court heavenly cauldron completely absorbed them, causing the world to stabilize. Lucky. Luo Fan thought to himself that he was lucky. It was indeed extremely lucky that he was able to swallow Gong Guzi into that world this time. If Gong Guzi hadn't underestimated him and thought that he had the overall situation under control, it would have been impossible for him to swallow Gong Guzi into that world. He wanted to swallow Gong Guzi into that world, but it was not going to be that easy. In fact, he might not be able to absorb Gong Guzi even after he destroyed all 5 worlds. Instead, he would be the unlucky one. At this moment, Luo Fan raised his eyebrows and revealed a faint smile. At this moment, the void trembled slightly. A beautiful figure materialized from the void. She appeared in a place far away. That figure was the Reverend of the Wuan Monastery. I thought you would have escaped long ago. Luo Fan looked at the Reverend of the Wuan Monastery and said with a faint smile. The Reverend of the Wuan Monastery had a determined look on her face as she looked around. Her eyes were filled with indescribable shock. This world, could this be the world that their sect had been guarding for hundreds of millions of years? Did the two of them just enter this world for the time it took to drink a cup of tea? How did this world become like this? Although she was quite far away from Luo Fan, it was impossible for her not to hear what Luo Fan had said. Her expression turned solemn as she said, "Although I don't know how I offended that pseudo-sage senior, as the Reverend of the Wuan Monastery, I will defend the dignity of our sect even if I have to die. Although I don't know how I offended that pseudo-sage senior, as the Reverend of the Wuan Monastery, I will defend the dignity of our sect even if I have to die." Luo Fan laughed and said, "These words, you can deceive those inexperienced people, but in front of me, you don't need to act. I think you just don't want to miss the opportunity for your half-step pseudo-sage treasure to become a real pseudo-sage treasure, so you don't want to leave." The Reverend of the Wuan Monastery only smiled when she heard this. At this moment, there was no trace of the pseudo-sage senior in this world. It was obvious that the danger had passed for the time being. Therefore, she was no longer worried and panicked. She was able to deal with Luo Fan's teasing more easily. "I didn't know that Senior was such an expert. I've been too impolite all this while. Please forgive me, Senior." The Reverend of the Wuan Monastery arrived near Luo Fan in just a few steps. She bowed to Luo Fan and said so. Hearing this, Luo Fan knew that she had a higher estimation of Luo Fan's strength because he was able to subdue the pseudo-sage Gong Guzi. She didn't dare to pretend that she didn't know anything and continued to address Luo Fan as a fellow cultivator. Naturally, Luo Fan didn't care about such a misunderstanding. Not only because she overestimated his strength, but also because he didn't care about such a title. Even if the reverend of the Wuhan monastery didn't overestimate his strength and thought that he was weaker than her, he wouldn't mind as long as it didn't affect their communication and what they were going to do. Why are you so polite? I still need to use the power of these 5 worlds to suppress the enemy. I'm afraid I can't extract the 5 sets of nomological laws and give them to you in a short period of time. Please understand, Luo Fan said calmly. It's all right. Although the reverend of the Wuhan monastery was unwilling, she couldn't say anything else at this moment. Luo Fan smiled when he heard this. He shifted his attention from the reverend of the Wuhan monastery to the world below the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. The world was barren at this moment. There were only 2 living beings, the giant who looked like a god of creation and Gongguzi. The battle between the 2 of them was intense beyond imagination. The strength of the god of creation was much stronger than Gongguzi. Coupled with the support of the entire world, Gongguzi had a hard time resisting the god of creation even though he had a powerful level 8 pseudo-sage treasure. The square seal kept flying, and countless runes were imprinted in the void by the square seal. These runes formed strange worlds, magical treasures, and weapons that bombarded the gigantic god of creation crazily. The god of creation didn't have any weapons. Instead, he used his body, fists, palms, fingers, and body to gather the infinite power of this world and the countless nomological laws and laws of this world. With a wave of his hand, he completely destroyed the things, worlds, magical treasures, and weapons that were formed by the runes released by the square seal. He even rebounded and attacked Gongguzi's body and the body of the square seal. The attacks that Gongguzi had unleashed were all unimaginably terrifying. If any of the things or worlds formed by runes fell into the universe that Luo Fan had stayed in before he entered the demon realm, its power would be completely unleashed. Then, that universe would definitely be completely destroyed in a short period of time. If any of the things formed by runes fell into the world that Luo Fan and the master of the Wuhan monastery were in, it would definitely cause extremely serious damage. It would also cause extremely serious damage, and it might even cause the other 4 worlds that had completely shared the damage of this world to become like this world at this very moment. One could imagine how terrifying this power was. However, even though such a terrifying attack had been launched tens of thousands of times, it did not harm the world or the god of creation. One could imagine how stable the world was and how powerful the god of creation was. Gongguzi was an extremely stubborn person. After realizing that his attacks were ineffective, he had no intention of giving up. He directly switched to a different method. The quantity was fewer than before, but the attack was stronger and the effect of the attack was more mysterious. Strange attacks were unleashed one after another. There were only hundreds of them. The things formed by runes rushed out of the square seal. After these things rushed out, they naturally emitted all kinds of strange powers that directly penetrated into the law layer of the world, causing the appearance of the world to completely change. The original wild world with a round sky and square earth had become a boundless void. There was no material substance, only endless vitality in the void. After this change, the entire world actually began to restrain the god of creation, causing him to suffer many shackles. As a result, the god of creation was unable to resist the attacks, and they directly bombarded his body. However, very soon, the god of creation struggled all over his body. The force that was restraining him disappeared in an instant, and the entire world returned to its original barbaric appearance, as if nothing had happened. So there's such a method. Unfortunately, this method might be extremely terrifying in the demon realm, but it's just an ordinary attack in other worlds. Luo Fan watched the fierce battle taking place inside the world from outside, and his face couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise mixed with pity. These were naturally targeted at the strange attacks that Gongguzi had unleashed just now. To completely control the key points of the law layer and then completely change the law layer, causing the entire world to completely change its appearance and become completely under one's control. If this kind of attack was in the demon realm, its power would naturally be unimaginably powerful. It would be enough to subdue and obliterate anyone who was slightly weaker before they could even gather the ability to resist. This was because the great path of the demon realm was integrated into the law layer. To control the key points of the law layer in the demon realm, and then change the law layer and change the world was equivalent to changing the great path. If one wanted to break free from such a change, one would need to completely find the key points of the change and then completely destroy the change. This required two prerequisites. First, one had to understand where the key points of the law layer that the attack change were. Second, one had to have a powerful force to destroy the change. In other words, one had to have the power to destroy the great path. Clearly, with these two prerequisites, it would be extremely difficult to defend against such an attack. Even though it could not be said to be invincible, it could still be used as a trump card. However, this was only in the demon realm. In other worlds, the law layer and the great path were separated. Even if the law layer was changed, it was just a simple change in the law layer. It had nothing to do with the great path at all. Under such circumstances, as long as one's control over the world was deep enough and the Tao of the world was strong enough, one would naturally be able to bypass those two conditions and easily transform the world back to its original state. At this moment, in the world below the divine court heavenly cauldron, the god of creation naturally had a deep grasp of the great path. To bypass the two prerequisites was as simple as a thought, which was why the situation just now had occurred. Gong Guzi's expression changed slightly when he saw that the attack that he treated as a trump card was easily broken free by the other party. However, he was a terrifying level 8 pseudo-sanctuary existence after all. Even though this development was contrary to his experience, he did not immediately react. He turned his hand and put away the square seal, producing a strong absorption force that frantically extracted all the power in this world. He wanted to completely extract all the power in this world. As the square seal extracted the power, the aura it emitted began to gradually strengthen, and it began to emit an aura that surpassed the level 8 pseudo-sanctuary. Luo Fan frowned when he saw this, but he was not worried. He raised his hand and patted the divine court heavenly cauldron. The divine court heavenly cauldron shook slightly, and a gray light gushed out of the mouth of the cauldron. It spun in the air and directly blasted into the world below. As the gray light surged in, the god of creation suddenly let out a loud roar. His body grew once more, and he became a 1 million meter tall giant. His hand almost blotted out the sky. He reached forward and suddenly clenched, enveloping Gong Guzi and the square seal in his hand. The clench looked like it was going to completely crush Gong Guzi and the treasure in his hand. Chapter 1248. Facing such an attack, Gong Guzi's expression changed slightly. The square seal in his hand, which exuded an aura that surpassed a level 8 pseudo-sage, did not wait any longer. With a loud bang, the square seal suddenly expanded to the size of the palm. Then it collided with the huge palm. When the two collided, the entire world, even with the suppression of the divine court heavenly cauldron, could not help but tremble slightly. It took a long time for it to calm down. In the interior of the world, layers of wondrous ripples spread out in all directions from the point of contact between the two, reverberating in the entire world for a good, while before calming down and returning to normal. The result of this attack was that the god of creation had the upper hand. The square seal was clenched into the shape of a palm, and light shone from it. Waves of powerful aura continuously leaked out from the palm, forming countless unbelievable lights and shadows. The square seal seemed to be wrapped in another world. At this moment, the level 8 pseudo-sage Gong Guzi's expression was extremely ugly. He immediately grabbed the square seal that had shrunk to the size of a fist and retreated tens of thousands of miles. Then, he looked at the square seal with an indescribable look of regret on his face. Although the god of creation had the upper hand, he was not unscathed. At this moment, His entire body shook violently, and there were even traces of blood continuously seeping out. The essence of these traces of blood was extremely profound. Under normal circumstances, if they seeped out, they would definitely be able to evolve into all kinds of unbelievable creatures. But at this moment, within the blood traces, they contained an extremely strange power that continuously disintegrated the mysteries within the blood traces. This caused the blood traces to scatter in the form of blood traces before finally disappearing without a trace. However, it was unable to display its original mysteries. The god of creation took a few deep breaths, and the entire world seemed to be stirred and gathered around the god of creation. After sweeping around the god of creation countless times, the god of creation finally recovered completely, and the aura on his body returned to its original state. Luo Fan stood above the world and looked at the changes in the world below. He could not help but smile. Although Gong Guzi was powerful, it was difficult for him to use his strength at this moment. But at this moment, even if he had the strength, he couldn't use it. If this trend continued, even if he could hold on for a long time, he would eventually reach the end of the road. The damage that the god of creation suffered was not as great as Gong Guzi's, and with the help of the entire world, he recovered his strength faster than Gong Guzi. By the time he had completely recovered, Gong Guzi still hadn't had the time to slightly repair the damage of that square seal. Facing such a situation, the god of creation pounced forward and unleashed all sorts of mysterious divine abilities towards Gong Guzi. Gong Guzi had no time to continue healing the square seal. He could only barely gather his own strength to fight the god of creation. Although the god of creation had the upper hand and Gong Guzi was tired of dealing with it. However, Gong Guzi was an 8th-tier pseudo-sage after all. His cultivation level was extremely high, and he was extremely powerful. However, he was still able to hold on, and all his movements looked rather natural. He was rather elegant and did not seem to be in a sorry state at all. In such a state, time passed slowly. Unknowingly, 3 years had passed. During these 3 years, Luo Fan and the abbess of the Wuan Monastery had been waiting quietly in that world. In the world below the Divine Court's heavenly cauldron, there were all sorts of terrifying battles that could destroy a world at all times. After these 3 years, even though that world had been strengthened by Luo Fan and had the support of the Divine Court's heavenly cauldron, the appearance of that world had changed completely. Although the entire world was still very complete, the various terrains inside had been completely flattened, just like the world where Luo Fan and the master of the Wuan Monastery were at this moment. That kind of devastation sent chills down one's spine. The god of creation had the support of the world, and his strength had surpassed the existence of a 9th-tier pseudo-sage. His grasp of the situation had naturally reached a very precise level. He had the upper hand in the beginning, and it was impossible for him to lose the upper hand now that he had the upper hand. In these 3 years, although Gong Guzi had displayed all sorts of divine abilities that even Luo Fan was amazed by, and he had displayed the various cultivation skills that an 8th-tier pseudo-sage should have, he could only continue to be at a disadvantage. By this time, 3 years later, he had already gone from being at a disadvantage to being at a disadvantage today. On this day, the figure of the god of creation flickered, and there were endless colorless and transparent flames burning around him. The entire world began to change slightly under the burning flames. The nomological laws seemed to have become fuel for the flames, and they were thrown into the flames crazily, making the flames more and more vigorous and dazzling. The power of the flames also became stronger and more terrifying. At this moment, Gong Guzi was holding the square seal that had become extremely tattered, and the aura on his body had become extremely dim and weak. There was even a drastic change in strength from time to time, as if he was on the verge of collapsing. His entire body could collapse at any time. Around him, the flames that covered the entire world were especially dense and hot. Their might was also especially strong. They had even turned into an extremely stable cage that was covered with countless strange runes, and they were constantly shrinking. The power of the flames was extremely terrifying, and they were a type of flame that was condensed from all the destructive power of the entire world. If any of these flames were to leak out and fall into the world where Luo Fan and the master of the Wuhan monastery were at this moment, then if Luo Fan did not come to extinguish the flames would instantly ignite the entire world. It would even spread through the connection between this world and the other four worlds and directly ignite the remaining four worlds. In the end, the five worlds that complemented and coexisted with the nomological laws would be completely destroyed, turning the five worlds into nothingness. This kind of flame was terrifying. One could imagine how terrifying they were. If Gongguzi was still in his peak state, he would naturally be able to extinguish such flames easily. It was naturally a simple task to put out the fire, but at this moment, after 3 years of battling with the god of creation, his physical state, power state, willpower state, and even the state of his divine soul could not be any worse. At this moment, he could still stand and face the god of creation. This was already a testament to his strong willpower. Under such circumstances, facing so many flames, he was a little powerless. Although he tried his best to gather his strength to extinguish the flames that were burning his body, he could not stop the flames that were pouncing on his body. In the end, his entire body was completely sealed by the flame cage. This caused the flames on the cage to be denser, and more powerful than the other parts of the cage to continuously burn his body. Needless to say, the body of a level 8 pseudo-sage was strong and sturdy. However, no matter how strong a body was, it could not withstand the flames that could destroy the world indefinitely. The flames that could destroy the world continued to burn. Therefore, more and more parts of Gongguzi's body began to turn into nothingness in the burning. They slowly evaporated and gradually turned into nothingness. I didn't expect to fail so miserably. Gongguzi laughed bitterly at this moment. Crack, 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 crack. The square seal in his hand began to make crisp sounds. Ka, 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 ka. The square seal in his hand began to emit crisp sounds. The originally dilapidated square seal actually emitted such sounds at this moment. Obviously, this was a sign of its shattering. At this moment, a strange aura shrouded the five worlds. As this aura shrouded the five worlds, all changes in power and destruction stopped instantly. Whether it was the world that Luo Fan and the Wuhan monastery master were in, the other four worlds, or even the world that was suppressed by the divine sky cauldron, it was the same. Under the effect of such a mysterious aura, the flames that were ignited by the laws of the entire world seemed to have stopped burning Gongguzi. The square seal that had already entered the process of complete destruction also stopped changing in an instant. The entire square seal lay quietly in Gongguzi's hand. Although it was full of cracks, and some even penetrated through the square seal, allowing people to see the scenery behind the square seal, it did not continue to collapse. However, it did not continue to collapse. Instead, it maintained such a stable state. It was as if this square seal had always been like this, as if it had always been like this when it was born, and it would always be like this. Master, when Gongguzi sensed this aura, he could not help but look ashamed as he murmured. At this moment, Luo Fan's expression was extremely ugly. This strange aura only stopped all changes in power and destruction, but it didn't affect the actions and thoughts of the living beings and cultivators. Therefore, although he was shrouded by this aura, Luo Fan only felt that this aura was vast, but he was not affected much by this aura. Of course, the Wuhan monastery master was also not affected by this aura like Luo Fan. However, compared to Luo Fan's ugly expression, her face was full of fear and regret. As for what she was afraid of and regretful about, it was self-evident. 9th tier pseudo-sanctuary. Luo Fan said with difficulty. At this moment, the aura fluctuated slightly, and the flames in the world instantly turned into gentle energy that directly poured into Gongguzi's body and the square seal. In the blink of an eye, Gongguzi's aura completely stabilized, and the countless cracks on the surface of the square seal were healed to a certain extent. Of course, this kind of healing naturally could not completely restore the square seal, but at least the cracks on the square seal that could be seen on the other side disappeared completely, allowing it to completely escape the fate of collapsing. In that world, the god of creation frantically urged his power, but no matter how hard he tried, the flames around him did not move at all. The process of turning the flames into energy to replenish his opponent showed no signs of stopping. A real ninth-tier pseudo-sanctuary is indeed not that easy to imitate. Luo Fan sighed and made the god of creation stop struggling in vain. He quietly floated in the center of the world and watched the changes that were happening to Gong Guzi's body. That aura was simply too vast and mystical. Although Luo Fan could sense that this was definitely the aura of a level 9 pseudo-sage, he was still able to sense it. However, he couldn't find the source of the aura at all. It was almost impossible to stop the Class 9 false sage from releasing this aura. Young friend, this is a misunderstanding. I wonder if you can give me some face and let my disciple go? Right at this moment, an aged voice sounded out of nowhere and directly entered into Luo Fan's ears. This aged voice contained an extremely mystical quality. Although it was gentle, it had the effect of shaking heaven and earth. When Luo Fan heard it, he could not help but feel his heart tremble. After the shock in his heart, Luo Fan was slightly relieved. After all, since the level 9 pseudo-sage had said that, it meant that either he didn't attack his own body, or he didn't have the ability to destroy the world formed by the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. Otherwise, with the style of this level 9 pseudo-sage, why would he mind saving Gong Guzi from there? After understanding this, he felt a little more confident and said, "Originally, Senior had instructed me to do so. I didn't dare to disobey. However, Senior Gong Guzi didn't believe me at all. My cultivation is low, but I didn't dare to let him go easily. I hope Senior can forgive me." After he said that, the old voice paused for a while before replying, "Little friend, don't worry. Although my disciple is stubborn, he's not someone to be trifled with. Although my disciple is stubborn, he still listens to my words. As long as I tell him not to have any conflict with you, he will definitely listen." Luo Fan still shook his head and said, "It's not that I don't believe Senior. It's just that this concerns my life, so I have to be careful. Senior should know about the misunderstanding between me and Senior Gong Guzi. I hope Senior can explain it on my behalf and let Senior Gong Guzi resolve the misunderstanding. That way, I can be at ease and solve this world. Please forgive me." "That makes sense." The aged voice sounded out very quickly this time. Hearing this, Luo Fan felt even more unfathomable. Although he had already spoken a few sentences, and he had the ability to know almost everything in this world, he still couldn't find the source of the voice. He couldn't find where the person who was speaking was. It was as if the voice was naturally born in this world, just like the sound of wind and rain. Such a strange situation made him secretly shocked, and he was even more fearful of the level 9 pseudo-saint. Gong Guzi. At this moment, the voice sounded out of nowhere in the world under Luo Fan's feet. The way it sounded was the same as the way it sounded in the world where Luo Fan and the master of the Wuhan monastery were. It sounded as if it was naturally born in that world, and the source couldn't be found at all. When Gong Guzi heard this voice, he knelt down and didn't even dare to raise his head as he said, "Greetings, Master. I'm untalented and actually lost to a cultivator who hasn't even become a pseudo-sage. I've embarrassed Master." He looked like he was so ashamed that he didn't have the face to see anyone. The aged voice sighed and said, "It's not your fault that you lost to this young friend. Back then, I suffered a great loss because of a similar magic treasure, and I haven't recovered from it for billions of years. Although the magic treasure you faced was only a replica, and this young friend could only use less than 1,000th of its power, it was enough for you to be in a stalemate. Although you lost, you didn't embarrass me." When Luo Fan heard this with the help of the divine court heavenly cauldron, he instantly understood who this level 9 pseudo-sage was, and also understood why Gong Guzi had come to find him. This level 9 pseudo-sage was clearly the one who had fought with the main venerate and caused a forbidden area to appear in the chaotic Lost Ocean. He had also caused 2 level 9 pseudo-sage treasures to shatter and caused countless worlds and universes outside the demon realm to be greatly affected. Back then, it was clear that not only did the main Venerate still suffer from injuries, but even the slightest attack from the main body would cause his injuries to relapse, and he couldn't even conveniently wipe himself away. This level 9 pseudo-sage who had fought with the main Venerate had also suffered great injuries. It was even possible that his injuries were even more severe and tragic than the main Venerate's. This Gonguzi must have started to hate the main Venerate because of this. He wanted to find him while the main Venerate was injured and couldn't do anything, and then kill him to take revenge for his master. What an unexpected disaster. Thinking of this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. When Gonguzi heard the aged voice's words, his expression became a little better, but he still felt ashamed. This time, you found the wrong person to look for this young friend. I know this young friend. Not only does he not have much of a relationship with the main Venerate, but he also has a big grudge against the main Venerate. You found the wrong person to ask about the main Venerate's location. Not only is it impossible for him to know, but he also needs to avoid it as much as possible. The aged voice said. When Gonguzi heard this, he couldn't help but reveal a look of shock. Then he said with even more shame, "So that's how it is. This disciple was wrong this time. This disciple shouldn't have been so stubborn and wasted Master's power. This disciple is really too much." Luo Fan couldn't even talk his way out of this matter, but Gonguzi didn't doubt the level 9 pseudo-sage at all. The aged voice said, "All right, since you understand your mistake, then let go of your enmity with this young friend. When this young friend lets you out, don't stay any longer. Quickly return to the cave to repair your magic treasures."